In the fog-shrouded Blackthorn Manor, a chilling curse whispers through ancient halls, where ghostly figures haunt the night and a priceless emerald vanishes. Hercule Poirot unravels a deadly web of murder, betrayal, and hidden treasure, as the tragic death of Lady Eleanor sparks a sinister plot. From eerie seances to secret passages, every shadow hides a clue, and one among the household is a killer, desperate to guard a centuries-old secret. Can Poirot's little gray cells expose the truth before the manor claims another soul? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat with a persistence that seemed almost personal. The little Belgian detective sat in his armchair, a cup of tisane steaming on the table beside him, his neatly trimmed mustache twitching slightly as he read the morning's correspondence. The room was a study in order: polished mahogany furniture, a meticulously arranged bookshelf, and a small fire crackling in the grate, casting a warm glow over the scene. Poirot's eyes, sharp and green as a cat's, scanned the pages of a letter that had arrived with the early post, its elegant handwriting marred by a faint tremor of urgency. The letter was from Lord Reginald Ashford, a name Poirot had not encountered in some years. They had met briefly during a diplomatic affair in Brussels, where Ashford, then a younger man, had impressed Poirot with his quiet dignity and keen intellect. Now it seemed that dignity was under strain. The letter spoke of strange happenings at Blackthorn Manor, the Ashford family's ancestral seat in the misty moors of Devon. Poirot's brow furrowed as he read, his fingers absently smoothing the paper. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," the letter began, "I write to you in a state of considerable distress, imploring your assistance in a matter that defies explanation. Since the untimely death of my wife, Lady Eleanor, 6 months ago, our home has been plagued by occurrences that I hesitate to call supernatural, yet which unsettle the household beyond measure. Apparitions, voices in the night, objects moved without human hand. These are but a few of the disturbances reported by my family and staff. I fear for their sanity, and perhaps my own. Your reputation for unraveling the impossible precedes you. Will you come to Blackthorn Manor and lend us your singular talents? I am prepared to offer whatever compensation you deem appropriate. Yours in hope, Reginald Ashford." Poirot set the letter down, his lips pursing as he considered its contents. The supernatural, he thought, was not a realm he entertained lightly. Ghosts and ghouls were the stuff of Gothic novels, not the orderly world of Hercule Poirot, where every mystery yielded to the relentless logic of his little gray cells. Yet the plea in Ashford's words was undeniable, and Poirot was not a man to ignore a challenge, particularly one wrapped in such intriguing ambiguity. He sipped his tisane, the herbal aroma calming his senses, and resolved to accept the invitation. By noon, Poirot had dispatched a telegram to Blackthorn Manor, confirming his arrival the following day. His valet, Georges, was instructed to pack a modest suitcase, enough for a week in the country with an emphasis on warm clothing, for the Devon moors were notorious for their chill. Poirot himself selected a particularly fine woolen coat, its deep burgundy hue a nod to his fastidious taste, and ensured his silver-headed cane was polished to a gleam. The journey, he decided, would be an opportunity to exercise his mind, which had grown restless in the quiet of London. The train to Devon departed promptly at 9 the next morning, carrying Poirot through a landscape that grew increasingly wild as the city gave way to rolling hills and sodden fields. The rain had not relented, and the carriage windows were streaked with water, blurring the view of hedgerows and distant church spires. Poirot sat alone in his compartment, a copy of the Times unopened on his lap, his thoughts occupied by the mystery awaiting him. He had little doubt that the apparitions at Blackthorn Manor were the work of a human hand. Fear, greed, or vengeance often masqueraded as the supernatural, but the specifics eluded him. Who stood to gain from unsettling the Ashford household? And what of Lady Eleanor's death? The letter had been vague on that point, mentioning only that it was untimely. Poirot's fingers tapped a rhythm on the armrest, a silent metronome to his racing thoughts. At Exeter, a chauffeur awaited him, a dour man in a black overcoat who introduced himself as Mr. Harrow. The drive to Blackthorn Manor took them along. Narrow lanes, the hedgerows pressing close, their branches clawing at the car like skeletal fingers. Harrow was not talkative, answering Poirot's polite inquiries with monosyllables, his eyes fixed on the road. The manor itself appeared suddenly, emerging from the fog like a ship from the mist. It was a sprawling edifice of gray stone, its towers and gables looming against the leaden sky. Ivy clung to its walls and the windows stared down like unblinking eyes. Poirot felt a shiver, not of fear, but of anticipation, as the car crunched to a halt on the gravel drive. Lord Reginald. Ashford greeted him at the door, a tall man in his late 50s, his silver hair thinning and his face etched with worry. His handshake was firm but brief, as though he feared lingering too long in the open air. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough for coming," he said, his voice low and strained. "This house, it is no longer a home but a place of dread." "Mon ami," Poirot replied, his accent crisp. "Dread is but a shadow cast by the unknown. Permit Hercule Poirot to shine a light, and we shall see what lies beneath." They stepped into the entrance hall, a cavernous space dominated by a grand staircase and portraits of stern-faced Ashfords glaring from the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish, undercut by a faint mustiness that spoke of neglect. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dulled by dust, and the floorboards creaked underfoot. Poirot's sharp eyes took in every detail: the faded tapestries, the scuff marks on the baseboards, the way the light flickered as though reluctant to linger. Ashford led him to a drawing room where a fire roared, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the hall. The room was furnished with heavy, dark furniture, the kind that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A group of people awaited, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. Ashford introduced them one by one, his voice steady but tinged with fatigue. First was his daughter, Miss Beatrice Ashford, a pale young woman of 25 with wide, nervous eyes and auburn hair pinned tightly at her nape. She offered Poirot a hesitant smile, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. "Father says you're the best detective in Europe," she said softly. I hope you can help us." Next was Victor Ashford, Lord Ashford's nephew, a lean man in his 30s with sharp features and a restless energy. His handshake was too firm, as though compensating for something, and his eyes darted to the windows, where the rain continued its assault. "This place is cursed," he muttered, almost to himself. "Always has been." The household's housekeeper, Mrs. Margaret Hale, stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid. She was a woman of indeterminate age, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her black dress devoid of ornamentation. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clipped, "I trust you'll put an end to this nonsense about ghosts. It's upsetting the staff." Finally, there was Mr. Carver, the butler, a stooped man with trembling hands and a face lined with fear. He said little, merely nodding when introduced, but Poirot noted the way his eyes flickered toward the door, as though expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. Ashford gestured for Poirot to sit, and a maid brought tea, her hands shaking as she poured. The conversation turned to the disturbances at Blackthorn Manor. Beatrice spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started a month after Mother died. At first it was just noises, footsteps in the corridors at night, doors creaking when no one was there. Then we saw her." "Saw who, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Mother," Beatrice said, her eyes filling with tears. "Or something that looked like her, a figure in white, gliding through the rose garden, at midnight. I saw it from my window. It was her face, I'm sure of it." Victor snorted, leaning back in his chair. "Superstitious nonsense. It's probably some poacher playing tricks or the wind in those blasted old trees, but I'll admit it's unnerving. The staff are half out of their minds." Mrs. Hale's lips thinned. "The staff are doing their duties, Mr. Victor, but they're not blind. Objects move, candlesticks, books, even Lady Eleanor's portrait in the gallery. Last week it was found face down on the floor. No one touched it. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "And you, Lord Ashford? Have you witnessed these phenomena?" Ashford hesitated, his fingers tightening around his teacup. I cannot say for certain. I've heard the noises, felt the cold in certain rooms. Once I thought I saw a shadow in the library, but it was gone when I looked again. I don't believe in ghosts, Monsieur Poirot, but I cannot deny that something is wrong here." "And Lady Eleanor's death?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but insistent. "The letter, it speaks of it as untimely. What do you mean by this?" The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire suddenly loud. Beatrice looked away, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. Victor shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. Mrs. Hale stared at the floor, and Carver's hands trembled more visibly. Ashford cleared his throat, his eyes distant. "Eleanor fell from the balcony of her bedroom," he said at last. "It was late after a dinner party. She'd been unwell in her mind for some time. The coroner ruled it an accident, but there were whispers. Some said she took her own life. I refused to believe it. She was troubled, yes, but not despairing. And now, with these hauntings—" His voice trailed off and he shook his head. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And these disturbances, they began after her death. Tell me, who else resides in the manor, or visits frequently?" Ashford listed the remaining staff, a cook. Chapter 2. Arrival in the shadow of the manor. The fog clung to the Devon moors like a living thing, wrapping Blackthorn Manor in a shroud that muffled sound and dimmed light. Hercule Poirot stepped from the chauffeur's car, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the gravel drive, and paused to survey the looming edifice before him. The manor's gray stone facade rose 3 stories, its towers piercing the mist like sentinels, their gargoyles leering down with weathered menace. The windows, tall and narrow, reflected the sullen sky, and the ivy that crawled across the walls seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Poirot adjusted his burgundy coat, his silver-headed cane gleaming in the dim light, and felt the familiar thrill of a mystery beckoning. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the air was heavy with damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and ancient stone. Mr. Harrow, the chauffeur, unloaded Poirot's suitcase with a grunt, his face as unreadable as the fog. "This way, sir," he said, his voice low as though reluctant to disturb the silence. Poirot followed, noting the man's hunched shoulders and the way his eyes avoided the manor's upper windows. The front door, a massive slab of oak carved with intricate vines, creaked open under Harrow's touch, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. The air inside was colder than outside, and Poirot's breath caught as he crossed the threshold, his senses assaulted by the weight of history. The hall was dominated by a grand staircase, its banister polished to a dark sheen, and portraits of long-dead Ashfords lined the walls, their eyes following Poirot with silent judgment. A chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled by dust, swaying slightly though no breeze stirred the air. Lord Reginald Ashford awaited him, his tall frame stooped as though carrying an invisible burden. His silver hair was neatly combed, but his face was pale, the lines around his eyes deepened by sleepless nights. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "your presence is a lifeline. I feared you might not come." "Mon cher Lord Ashford," Poirot replied, his voice crisp with his Belgian accent. "When a puzzle presents itself, Hercule Poirot does not refuse. You have written of disturbances, of things that go bump in the night, n'est-ce pas? I am here to bring order to this chaos." Ashford's smile was fleeting, tinged with relief and doubt. "I hope you can, Monsieur Poirot. This house, it tests the nerves of even the strongest." He led Poirot through the hall, their footsteps echoing, on the black and white marble floor. The manor seemed to absorb sound, the silence between their steps oppressive. Poirot's sharp eyes catalogued every detail: the scuff marks on the baseboards, the faint odor of mildew beneath the polish, the way the light from a single candelabrum flickered as though reluctant to illuminate the shadows. They entered a drawing room where a fire roared in a massive hearth, its warmth battling the chill that seeped through the walls. The room was furnished with heavy oak furniture, upholstered in faded brocade, and a large window overlooked a garden lost in the fog. A group of people stood or sat, their postures tense, their faces a gallery of unease. Ashford introduced them with practiced courtesy, though his voice betrayed a tremor. First was his daughter, Miss Beatrice Ashford, a young woman of 25, with pale skin and auburn hair pinned tightly at her nape. Her eyes, a striking blue, were wide with anxiety, and her hands twisted a lace handkerchief as she curtsied. "Father speaks so highly of you, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I pray you can make sense of this nightmare." Poirot inclined his head, his gaze lingering on her trembling fingers. "Mademoiselle, I assure you the nightmares of Blackthorn Manor shall yield to the light of reason." Next was Victor Ashford, Lord Ashford's nephew, a wiry man in his early 30s with sharp cheekbones and restless energy. His dark hair was slicked back, and his gray eyes flicked to the window as though expecting to see something in the fog. He offered a handshake that was too firm, almost defiant. "I don't know what you'll find here, Poirot," he said, his tone clipped. "Ghosts or no, this place is trouble. Always has been." "Trouble, monsieur, is often a matter of perspective," Poirot replied, his smile polite but probing. "It is my task to change that perspective." Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, stood near the fireplace, her posture rigid as a statue. Her gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her black dress was devoid of ornamentation, as though she wished to blend into the shadows. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice sharp, "I trust you'll put an end to this foolishness about spirits. The staff are near breaking, and I won't have it." Poirot noted the authority in her tone, the way her eyes darted to the others as if assessing their reactions. "Madame, order and discipline are the cornerstones of my method. I shall restore both, rest assured." The butler, Mr. Carver, was last, a stooped figure with thinning hair and hands that trembled as he bowed. His face was lined with fear, and he avoided Poirot's gaze, muttering only a greeting before retreating to the corner. Poirot observed the man's nervous tics, the way his fingers clutched at his cuffs, and filed the observation away. A maid, young and pale, entered with a tea tray, her hands shaking as she poured. The cups rattled softly, and she flinched when a log in the fire popped. Poirot accepted a cup, his movements precise, and settled into a chair, his small frame somehow commanding the room. "Now, mes amis," he said, his voice calm but firm, "let us speak of these disturbances. What has occurred to make Blackthorn Manor a place of such dread?" Beatrice spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "It began a month after Mother died. At first it was small things. Footsteps in the corridors at night, doors creaking open when we knew they'd been locked. Then I saw her." She paused, her eyes glistening. Mother, or something like her, a figure in white, moving through the rose garden at midnight. I saw it from my window. It had her face. Victor snorted, leaning back in his chair. "Beatrice, you saw a shadow, or maybe one of the maids sneaking out. This ghost nonsense is just that, nonsense. But I'll admit the noises are real. I've heard them myself. Creaking, whispering, like the house is alive." Mrs. Hale's lips thinned. "The staff have seen things too. Candlesticks moved from one room to another, books falling from shelves. Last week, Lady Eleanor's portrait in the gallery was found face down. No one touched it, I'd swear to it." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching slightly. "And you, Lord Ashford? What have you witnessed?" Ashford hesitated, his fingers tightening around his teacup. "I've heard the noises, felt the cold in certain rooms. Once in the library I thought I saw a shadow move, but when I turned, it was gone. I don't believe in ghosts, Monsieur Poirot, but I cannot explain these things." "And Lady Eleanor's death?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but insistent. "You called it untimely. What can you tell me?" The room fell silent, the fire's crackle suddenly loud. Beatrice looked away, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. Victor's jaw tightened, and Mrs. Hale stared at the floor. Carver's trembling intensified, his eyes fixed on the door. Ashford cleared his throat, his gaze distant. Eleanor fell from her balcony, he said at last. It was late, after a dinner party. She'd been troubled in her mind. The coroner said it was an accident, but there were whispers of suicide. I didn't believe it. She was struggling, yes, but not despairing. And now, with these disturbances... His voice faltered and he shook his head. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And who else resides here, or visits often? Ashford listed the remaining staff. A cook, 2 maids, a groundskeeper, and a governess for Beatrice's young cousin, who was away at school. He also mentioned Madame Vera, a medium invited by Beatrice to contact the spirits due to arrive that evening. Poirot's mustache twitched at the mention, but he said nothing, merely sipping his tea. After tea, Ashford offered to show Poirot the manor. They moved through corridors lined with faded tapestries, the air heavy with the scent of old wood. Poirot noted the creaking floorboards, the drafts that seemed to follow them, and the way certain doors stuck in their frames. In the library, he paused before Lady Eleanor's portrait, her blue eyes staring down with an intensity that seemed almost alive. The frame was slightly askew, and Poirot resisted the urge to straighten it, instead noting the dust patterns disturbed by recent handling. They reached the west wing, a neglected section sealed off for years. Ashford hesitated at the door, his hand on the key. We rarely come here, he said. It's oppressive. Then it is where we must go, Poirot said, his tone firm. The west wing was a labyrinth of dust and shadows, its air thick with neglect. Poirot moved carefully, his cane tapping the floor, his eyes scanning for clues. Near a bookcase, he spotted a faint scuff mark, and when he pressed against the wood, it shifted, revealing a narrow passage. Ashford gasped, but Poirot merely smiled. The manor, it keeps its secrets well, he said. Dinner was a tense affair, the long dining table dwarfing the small group. Madame Vera arrived, a theatrical woman draped in scarves, her eyes glittering with zeal. She spoke of energies and spirits proposing a séance to contact Lady Eleanor. Beatrice was eager, Victor skeptical, and Ashford reluctant but agreeable. Poirot agreed to observe, his mind already turning over the clues, the passage, the portrait, the nervous staff. As the candles were lit for the séance, he watched the faces around him, searching for the truth behind the shadows. Chapter 3. The Tale of the Cursed Lady. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor was a study in faded grandeur, its long mahogany table gleaming under the light of a chandelier that swayed imperceptibly, casting restless shadows on the walls. Hercule Poirot sat at one end, his small fastidious frame dwarfed by the high-backed chair, his green eyes glinting as he observed the assembled company. The rain had resumed its assault outside, drumming against the tall windows with a rhythm that seemed to echo the tension in the room. The air was thick with the scent of roasted pheasant and wax, but beneath it lingered a faint mustiness, as though the manor itself exhaled secrets with every breath. Lord Reginald Ashford presided at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the candlelight, his face etched with a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights. To his right sat his daughter Beatrice, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her pale hands clutching a napkin as though it were a lifeline. Victor Ashford, the nephew, slouched opposite her, his sharp features set in a scowl, his fingers tapping, an impatient rhythm on the tablecloth. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, sat with rigid posture, her gray bun severe, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an intrusion. Mr. Carver, the butler, hovered near the sideboard, his trembling hands betraying his nerves as he poured wine with exaggerated care. The new arrival, Madame Vera, the medium, sat beside Beatrice, her scarves a riot of color against the somber room, her dark eyes glittering with an intensity that Poirot found both theatrical and suspicious. Dinner had been served, a hearty meal of pheasant, potatoes, and glazed carrots, though the portions were modest as if the cook feared waste in a house so unsettled. Poirot took small, precise bites, his attention less on the food than on the conversation, which had turned inevitably to the disturbances plaguing Blackthorn Manor. He had requested, with his usual polite insistence, that the household share the full history of the Manor's so-called hauntings, and it was Beatrice who began, her voice soft but steady, as though she had rehearsed the tale many times in her mind. "It's not just the noises or the figure in the garden," she said, her blue eyes fixed on the candle before her. "There's a story, Monsieur Poirot, one that's been whispered in this house for generations. The curse of Blackthorn Manor. It began with Lady Arabella Ashford back in 1683. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his mustache twitching with interest. "A curse, mademoiselle? Tell me of this Lady Arabella." Beatrice glanced at her father, who nodded, his expression grim. She took a deep breath and continued. "Lady Arabella was the wife of Lord Edmund Ashford, one of our ancestors. She was beautiful, they say, but headstrong, and she defied her husband's wishes by taking a lover, a young poet who lived on the estate. When Edmund discovered the affair, he was consumed with rage. He locked Arabella in the West Wing in a room at the top of the tower and swore she would never leave until she repented. But she didn't repent. She died there alone. Some say she starved, others that she threw herself from the window. Ever since, it's said her spirit haunts the manor, seeking vengeance on the Ashford line." Victor snorted, pushing his plate away. "A fairy tale for gullible maids. Every old house has a ghost story, Beatrice. It's just a way to explain creaky floors and bad plumbing." Mrs. Hale's lips thinned. "It's more than a story, Mr. Victor. The staff know it well. Lady Arabella's room in the West Wing, it's been locked for centuries, but things happen there. Lights flicker, voices are heard. And since Lady Eleanor's death, it's grown worse." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his fingers steepled before him. "And how, Madame Hale, does the death of Lady Eleanor connect to this tale of Lady Arabella?" Ashford cleared his throat, his voice low. "Eleanor was fascinated by the story. She spent hours in the library, reading old journals, trying to piece together the truth. She believed the curse was real, that Arabella's spirit was restless because of some unresolved wrong. She even spoke of holding a séance to contact her, though I forbade it. She was not herself in those final months." Beatrice's voice trembled as she added, "Mother saw her, Monsieur Poirot. Before she died, she told me she'd seen a woman in white standing at the foot of her bed. She said it was Arabella, warning her. And then—" She broke off, her eyes filling with tears. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was racing. "A woman in white, you say? And this figure, it has been seen by others since Lady Eleanor's death?" Carver, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice quavering. "I saw it, sir, 2 weeks ago in the gallery. A figure, all in white, gliding past the portraits. I thought I'd faint dead away. It was her, Lady Eleanor, or maybe Lady Arabella, I couldn't tell." Madame Vera leaned forward, her scarves rustling. "The veil between worlds is thin in this house," she said, her voice low and dramatic. "The spirits are restless, Monsieur Poirot. They seek justice, or perhaps release. I feel their presence even now." She closed her eyes, her hands hovering over the table as if sensing an invisible force. Victor rolled his eyes. "Save it for the séance, madame. You're here to put on a show, not solve anything." "Enough, Victor," Ashford snapped, his voice sharp for the first time. "Monsieur Poirot is here to help, and Madame Vera was invited at Beatrice's request. We'll have no more of your cynicism." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming the room. "Monsieur Victor, your skepticism is noted, but all perspectives are of interest to Hercule Poirot. Tell me, what do you believe is the cause of these disturbances, if not spirits?" Victor shrugged, his expression sullen. "Someone's playing tricks. Poachers, maybe, or one of the staff looking to stir up trouble. This house is falling apart. Leaky roofs, drafts, old wiring. It's not ghosts, it's neglect." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And yet the portrait falls, the candlesticks move, the figure appears. These are not the work of drafts alone, no?" Mrs. Hale spoke up, her voice firm. "I've run this household for 20 years, Monsieur Poirot. I know every creak and groan of this place. These things are not normal. The staff are terrified. Mary, the maid, won't go near the west wing, and the cook swears she hears weeping in the pantry at night. Poirot turned to Carver, who flinched under his gaze. And you, Monsieur Carver? You have seen this figure. What else have you observed? Carver's hands shook as he set down the wine decanter. It's not just the figure, sir. Things move. My keys went missing last week, turned up in the cellar. And the cold. It's not natural. You feel it in your bones, like something's watching. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest, but he said nothing, merely sipping his wine. The conversation drifted to practical matters. Ashford's plans to sell part of the estate. Victor's insistence that the manor was a financial drain. Beatrice's quiet hope that the disturbances would cease. Madame Vera remained silent, her eyes darting between the others, as if reading their thoughts. After dinner, Poirot requested to see the gallery where Carver had seen the figure. Ashford led him through a maze of corridors, the walls lined with portraits of Ashford's past, their stern faces illuminated by flickering sconces. The gallery was a long, narrow room, its windows draped in heavy velvet, its floor covered by a threadbare carpet. Lady Eleanor's portrait hung at the far end, her blue eyes staring out with an intensity that made Poirot pause. The frame was slightly crooked, as he had noticed earlier, and he stepped closer, his cane tapping the floor. "Tell me, Lord Ashford," he said. "When was this portrait last touched?" Ashford frowned. "I don't know. The staff clean regularly, but no one's mentioned moving it since it was found face down last week." Poirot examined the frame, noting the disturbed dust, the faint smudge of a fingerprint. "Curieux," he murmured. "The dust, it tells a story of its own." They moved to the rose garden, visible through the gallery's windows, though the fog obscured all but the nearest blooms. Beatrice joined them, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. "This is where I saw her," she said, pointing to a stone bench half hidden by roses. "She was standing there in white, her hair loose. It was Mother's face, I swear it." Poirot studied the garden, noting the muddy path, the way the roses drooped under the weight of the rain. "And the ground, mademoiselle, was it disturbed? Footprints, perhaps?" Beatrice shook her head. "It was too dark to see, but ghosts don't leave footprints, do they?" Poirot smiled faintly. "In my experience, mademoiselle, those who wish to be seen as ghosts are very much of this world." As they returned to the drawing room, Madame Vera was preparing for the séance, arranging candles in a circle on a small table. The room was dim, the fire casting long shadows. Poirot took a seat, his posture erect, his eyes alert. The others joined, their faces a mix of anticipation and dread. Madame Vera began her chant, her voice rising and falling, and the air grew, colder, the candles flickering. Poirot's mind was not on the spirits, but on the living, on the glances exchanged, the hands that trembled, the secrets hidden behind nervous smiles. A sudden gust rattled the windows, and Beatrice gasped. Carver clutched his chest, his face pale. Victor muttered a curse, and even Ashford's composure wavered. Poirot alone remained calm, his little gray cells working furiously. The tale of Lady Arabella, the death of Lady Eleanor, the disturbances, all were threads in a tapestry of deception, and he was determined to unravel it. Chapter 4. A Séance in the Dark. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor was transformed into a theater of shadows as the candles were lit, their flames casting a flickering glow across the heavy drapes and polished oak furniture. Hercule Poirot sat at the edge of the circle, his small frame erect, his green eyes sharp beneath the brim of his neatly combed hair. The air was thick with the scent of wax and the faint, lingering aroma of the evening's dinner, but an undercurrent of something, colder, more primal, seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The rain outside had softened to a steady patter, but the manor groaned under its weight, the creaks and sighs of ancient timbers blending with the nervous breaths of the assembled company. Madame Vera, the medium, presided at the center of the small round table, her scarves a cascade of crimson and gold, her dark eyes gleaming with a fervor that Poirot found both theatrical and calculated. Around her sat Lord Reginald Ashford, his face pale and drawn, his hands clasped tightly before him. Beatrice Ashford, her auburn hair catching the candlelight, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. Victor Ashford, slouched in his chair, his expression a mask of skepticism, and Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, her posture rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Carver, the butler, had been persuaded to join, though he hovered at the edge, his trembling hands betraying his reluctance. Poirot, ever the observer, noted the way each face reflected the candlelight, revealing flickers of emotion, doubt, dread, and, in one or two cases, something akin to anticipation. Madame Vera raised her hands, her voice low and resonant, cutting through the silence. "We gather to pierce the veil," she intoned, her accent faintly exotic, though Poirot suspected it was as much a performance as her scarves. "The spirits of Blackthorn Manor are restless, bound by sorrow and secrets. We call upon them to speak, to reveal their truth. Join hands, and let your minds be open." Beatrice hesitated, then took her father's hand, her fingers trembling. Victor rolled his eyes but complied, his grip loose, as if to distance himself from the ritual. Mrs. Hale's hand was steady, but her eyes darted to the door as though expecting an interruption. Carver's touch was clammy, and he flinched when Poirot's small, manicured hand closed over his. Poirot himself joined the circle with a polite nod, his expression serene, though his mind was a whirl of observation. The séance, he knew, was as much a stage for the living as for the supposed dead. The candles flickered as Madame Vera began to chant, her voice rising and falling in a cadence that seemed to echo the rhythm of the rain. "Spirits of the manor, we beseech you," she said, her eyes closed, her head tilted back. "Lady Arabella, Lady Eleanor, if you linger here, make your presence known. Speak through me, your humble vessel." The room grew colder, the air heavy, with an oppressive weight. Poirot's senses were alert, noting the faint creak of the floorboards, the way the curtains swayed despite the closed windows, the quickened breathing of those around the table. Beatrice's grip tightened on her father's hand, and Carver's trembling intensified. Victor muttered something under his breath, too low to catch, but his eyes were fixed on Madame Vera, a mix of scorn and unease in his gaze. Suddenly, a low moan filled the room, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Beatrice gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. Carver let out a strangled cry, and even Ashford's composure wavered, his eyes darting to the shadows. Poirot remained still, his gaze sweeping the room, searching for the source of the sound. The moan grew louder, forming words, faint and distorted, as though spoken through water. Why, betrayed?" Madame Vera's head lolled forward, her body swaying. "The spirit speaks," she cried, her voice trembling with theatrical intensity. "Lady Eleanor, is it you? Tell us your pain." The candles flared, their flames stretching upward, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and the chandelier above swayed, its crystals clinking like distant bells. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. The effects were dramatic, but drama, he knew, could be engineered. He noted the position of the candles, the way the air moved, the subtle shift in Madame Vera's posture. Was she manipulating the scene, or was she too caught in the moment? Beatrice's voice broke the silence, high and panicked. "Mother, is it you? Please tell us what you want." The moan came again, sharper now, and the table trembled, as though struck by an unseen hand. Carver jerked back, breaking the circle, his face ashen. "No more," he cried, clutching his chest. "It's her, it's Lady Eleanor." He staggered to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor, and collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his cane tapping as he crossed to Carver's side. "Calm yourself, monsieur," he said, his voice firm but soothing. "Breathe deeply. There is no danger here." He guided Carver to a chair, noting the man's pallor, the sweat beading on his brow. The butler's fear was genuine, But fear, Poirot knew, could be induced by human means as easily as supernatural ones. Madame Vera slumped in her chair, her eyes fluttering open, her face pale. "The spirit, it was strong," she murmured. "It overwhelmed me. Lady Eleanor is angry, bound to this place by a great wrong." Victor snorted, shoving back from the table. "A fine performance, madame. You had us all jumping like fools, but it's just parlor tricks, isn't it? Smoke and mirrors?" "Silence, Victor," Ashford snapped, his voice raw. "This is no game. Something happened here, something real." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture commanding silence. "Mes amis, let us not leap to conclusions. The phenomena they are. Striking, oui, but they are not beyond explanation. Madame Vera, tell me, how do you produce such effects? The moan, the trembling table?" The medium's eyes flashed with indignation. "I produce nothing, Monsieur Poirot. The spirits act through me. I am but their conduit." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "And yet, conduits can be constructed, no? A hidden bellows, a wire beneath the table, a confederate in the shadows. These things are known to Hercule Poirot." "Madame," Vera bristled, but before she could respond, Beatrice spoke, her voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, please. I felt her. Mother was here. She's trying to tell us something. You must believe me." Poirot turned to her, his expression softening. "Mademoiselle, I believe that you believe. But belief is not truth. Truth requires evidence, and evidence is what I seek." The séance ended in disarray, the candles snuffed out, the room left in near darkness save for the fire's dying glow. Ashford escorted Madame Vera to her room, her steps unsteady, while Mrs. Hale and Victor helped Carver to his quarters, the butler still muttering about the spirit. Beatrice lingered, her eyes fixed on Poirot. "You don't believe in ghosts, do you?" she asked softly. Poirot's mustache twitched. "Mademoiselle, I believe in the human heart, its fears, its desires, its capacity for deception. These are the ghosts that haunt Blackthorn Manor, and they are the ones I shall confront." Alone in the drawing room, Poirot examined the table, the candles, the floor. He found no wires, no hidden devices, but his fingers brushed a faint groove in the wood beneath the table, as though something had been attached and removed. He straightened, his mind turning over the possibilities. The moan, the trembling, the cold, all could be staged, but to what end? To frighten the household? To drive them away? Or to conceal a greater crime? He moved to the window, peering into the fog-shrouded garden. The rose bushes were barely visible, their petals drooping under the rain. Beatrice's story of the figure in white lingered in his mind, as did Carver's terror and Madame Vera's theatrics. Someone in this house was orchestrating a performance, and Poirot was determined to uncover the director. As he retired to his room, a small but comfortable chamber overlooking the moors, Poirot's thoughts were a whirlwind of clues and questions. The séance had revealed more than spirits. It had exposed the fears and tensions of the household, the cracks in their unity. Lady Eleanor's death, the tale of Lady Arabella, the hidden passage in the West Wing, all were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot's little gray cells were beginning to assemble. He lay in bed, the manor creaking around him, and smiled into the darkness. The game, as he called it, was well and truly afoot. Chapter 5. The little gray cells awakened, the morning sun struggled through the heavy fog that cloaked Blackthorn Manor, casting a pallid light across the breakfast room where Hercule Poirot sat, his tisane steaming in a delicate porcelain cup. The room was smaller than the grand dining hall, but no less oppressive, its walls lined with dark paneling and a single window that rattled under the persistent drizzle. The scent of toast and kippers mingled with the faint mustiness that seemed to permeate every corner of the manor, a reminder of its age and secrets. Poirot, immaculate in a charcoal suit and a perfectly knotted tie, sipped his tisane, his green eyes sharp as he surveyed the assembled company. The events of the previous night's séance hung over the room like a storm cloud, and the tension was palpable. Lord Reginald Ashford sat at the head of the table, his face haggard, his silver hair slightly disheveled as though he had slept poorly. Beatrice Ashford, pale and drawn, toyed with a piece of toast, her blue eyes darting to the door as if expecting an apparition to appear. Victor Ashford, the nephew, was absent, though his empty chair seemed to speak of his disdain for the morning's gathering. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, stood near the sideboard overseeing the maid who served with trembling hands, her own expression one of tightly controlled irritation. Mr. Carver, the butler, was nowhere to be seen, his absence noted by Poirot with a slight twitch of his mustache. Madame Vera, the medium, sat opposite Poirot, her scarves more subdued today, though her dark eyes still gleamed with a knowing intensity. Poirot set down his cup, his movements precise, and addressed the table. "Bon matin, mes amis," he said, his Belgian accent crisp. "After the excitements of last night, I trust you have rested, though perhaps not well. The séance, it has stirred the waters, no? Now Hercule Poirot must dive into those waters to find the truth." Ashford cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Monsieur Poirot, last night was, unsettling. Carver is still shaken. He's taken to his room, claiming illness. I don't know what to make of it all." Beatrice's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "It was Mother. I'm sure of it. She was trying to speak to us." "Monsieur Poirot, you heard the voice, felt the cold. How can you doubt it?" Poirot's smile was gentle but unyielding. "Mademoiselle, I doubt not your sincerity, but the senses, they can be deceived. The voice, the cold, the trembling table, these are effects, but effects have causes, and causes, they are the domain of Hercule Poirot." Madame Vera leaned forward, her scarves rustling. "You are a man of logic, Monsieur Poirot, but the spirit world does not bend to logic. Lady Eleanor's soul is trapped here, bound by a great wrong. I felt her presence last night, her anguish." Poirot's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained polite. "Madame, your talents are most impressive, but I am a man of facts. Tell me, how do you prepare for such a séance? The candles, the table, were they arranged by you alone?" The medium bristled, her voice sharp. "I prepared the room as I always do, Monsieur Poirot. The candles were from the Manor's stores, the table untouched by any but myself. If you suspect trickery, you insult the spirits." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming. "I suspect only that which is hidden, madame." "And in Blackthorn Manor much is hidden, none?" Mrs. Hale spoke up, her voice clipped. "If you're suggesting one of us is behind this, Monsieur Poirot, I'll have you know the staff are loyal. They're frightened, yes, but they're not schemers. I've run this house for 20 years, and I'd know if someone was playing tricks." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Madame Hale, your vigilance is admirable, but loyalty does not preclude secrets. I would speak with the staff, and with each of you, to understand the events surrounding Lady Eleanor's death and these disturbances." Ashford nodded, though his eyes were wary. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, you have my full cooperation. But be gentle with Beatrice. She's been through enough." Beatrice's lips trembled, but she straightened, her voice firm. "I'll answer any questions, Monsieur Poirot. I want the truth, even if it hurts." Poirot inclined his head, his mind already turning to the task ahead. After breakfast, he began his interviews, starting with Mrs. Hale in the housekeeper's small office, a cramped room lined with ledgers and smelling of ink and lavender. She sat across from him, her hands folded, her posture rigid. "Madame Hale," Poirot began, "you have served the Ashfords for 20 years. You knew Lady Eleanor well, oui?" Mrs. Hale nodded, her lips tight. "I did. She was a fine lady, though troubled in her later years. She'd wander the halls at night, muttering about the curse, about Lady Arabella. I tried to keep her calm, but she was distant." "And her death?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. "You were here that night?" Mrs. Hale's eyes flickered, a brief shadow crossing her face. "I was. It was a dinner party. Nothing grand, just family, and a few guests. Lady Eleanor retired early, said she had a headache. Next morning we found her below the balcony. The coroner said she fell, but there was talk of suicide. I didn't believe it. She wasn't the sort." Poirot's fingers steepled before him. "And the balcony? It was secure? No loose railings? No signs of tampering?" Mrs. Hale shook her head. "It was checked after, solid as ever. But she'd been drinking and her mind wasn't right, that's what they said. Poirot noted the slight hesitation in her voice, the way her hands tightened in her lap. And these disturbances, when did they begin? A month after her death, Mrs. Hale said. Footsteps at night, objects moved. The staff started, whispering about the curse. I told them it was nonsense, but then the portrait fell, and Mary saw the figure in the garden. It's been chaos since. Poirot thanked her and moved on to Beatrice, meeting her in the library, where Lady Eleanor's portrait loomed overhead. Beatrice sat in a high-backed chair, her hands twisting her handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed. Mademoiselle, Poirot said softly. Your mother, she was troubled, yes? Tell me of her state of mind. Beatrice's voice trembled. She was obsessed with the curse, Monsieur Poirot. She'd read every journal in the library looking for answers about Lady Arabella. She said the manor was cursed because of a wrong done long ago. She saw things, shadows, figures. She told me once that Arabella spoke to her, warned her to leave. And the night she died? Poirot asked, his eyes never leaving her face. Beatrice's breath hitched. She was quiet at dinner, distracted. She left early, said she needed air. I checked on her later, but her room was empty. I thought she'd gone for a walk. Then, we found her. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she wiped them away fiercely. I should have stayed with her. Poirot's voice was gentle. You could not have known, mademoiselle. But tell me, who else was at this dinner party? Beatrice listed the guests. Her father, Victor, a local doctor named Hargreaves, and a family friend, Mrs. Langley. They all left before midnight, she said. No one saw anything unusual. Poirot's next interview was with Victor, whom he found in the billiard room racking balls with unnecessary force. The young man's sharp features were set in a scowl, his gray eyes defiant. Monsieur Victor, Poirot began, you do not believe in these ghosts, yet you are troubled. Why? Victor slammed a ball into the pocket, his voice curt. This house is a money pit, Poirot. My uncle's obsessed with keeping it, but it's bleeding him dry. These hauntings are just someone's idea of a joke, or maybe a way to push him to sell. I don't know who, but I'd bet on one of the staff they're always skulking about. And Lady Eleanor's death? Poirot asked. You were there that night. Victor's jaw tightened. I was. She was off as usual, muttering about curses. She left dinner early and I didn't see her after. Next thing I know, she's dead. Accident, suicide. Does it matter? She's gone. And now we're stuck with this madness. Poirot noted the bitterness in his tone, the way his hands gripped the cue. And your alibi for that night, monsieur? After dinner, where were you? Victor's eyes narrowed. In my room, reading. Alone. You think I had something to do with it? Poirot smiled faintly. I think only that everyone has a story, and I must hear them all. The interviews continued through the morning, Poirot speaking with the cook, the maids, and the groundskeeper, each adding fragments to the puzzle. The cook swore she'd heard weeping in the pantry. The maid spoke of cold spots and moved objects. The groundskeeper claimed to have seen a figure in the rose garden, though he couldn't swear to its face. Each story was tinged with fear, but Poirot's sharp mind sifted through the embellishments, searching for inconsistencies. By afternoon, he returned to the west wing, drawn back to the hidden passage he had discovered. The bookcase creaked as he opened it, revealing the narrow corridor, its walls damp and lined with cobwebs. Poirot moved carefully, his cane tapping the stone floor, his eyes scanning for clues. He found a scrap of white fabric caught on a nail, its texture fine like silk. He tucked it into his pocket, his mind racing. A ghost in white, perhaps, but one that left physical traces. As evening approached, Poirot sat in his room, a small fire crackling in the grate, his notebook open before him. He sketched a timeline of Lady Eleanor's death and the disturbances, noting the discrepancies in the stories. Mrs. Hale's hesitation, Victor's vague alibi, Beatrice's certainty of her mother's presence. The séance had been a spectacle, but spectacles, he knew, were often diversions. Someone in Blackthorn Manor was playing a game, and Poirot's little gray cells were awakening to the challenge. Chapter 6. Footprints in the dust. The fog that enveloped Blackthorn Manor seemed to thicken with each passing hour, wrapping the ancient edifice in a cocoon of mist that muffled sound and dulled the senses. Hercule Poirot stood in the entrance hall, his burgundy coat draped over his arm, his silver-headed cane tapping lightly against the marble floor as he prepared to venture deeper into the manor's secrets. The morning light, weak and gray, filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows that danced across the portraits of stern-faced Ashfords. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, undercut by a faint dampness that spoke of hidden decay. Poirot's green eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the hall, noting the scuff marks on the baseboards, the slight misalignment of a rug, the way the chandelier's crystals trembled as though stirred by an unseen hand. After the unsettling séance and his morning interviews, Poirot had resolved to explore the West Wing more thoroughly, drawn by the discovery of the hidden passage behind the bookcase. The manor, he sensed, was a labyrinth of secrets, and the West Wing, neglected and shunned, held clues that the living preferred to ignore. He had requested Lord Ashford's permission to investigate alone, citing the need for undisturbed concentration, and Ashford had agreed, though his face betrayed a flicker of unease. "Be careful, Monsieur Poirot," he had said, his voice low. "That part of the house. It's not welcoming." "Mon cher Lord Ashford," Poirot had replied, his tone calm but firm. "Hercule Poirot is not deterred by unwelcoming shadows. The truth it hides in such places, and I shall find it." Now, as he approached the heavy oak door leading to the West Wing, Poirot paused, his fingers brushing the key that Ashford had provided. The door was carved with intricate vines, their patterns worn by time, and it creaked ominously as he turned the lock. The air beyond was colder, thicker, carrying the musty scent of neglect. Poirot stepped inside, his cane tapping the uneven stone floor, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The West Wing was a maze of narrow corridors and abandoned rooms, their walls lined with peeling wallpaper, their windows boarded or draped with tattered curtains. Dust motes floated in the faint light that seeped through cracks, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water and the occasional groan of the manor's ancient timbers. Poirot moved with purpose, his small frame navigating the labyrinth with the precision of a man accustomed to unraveling mysteries. He had brought a small notebook and pencil, and he jotted down observations as he went. The cobwebs that clung to door frames, undisturbed except in certain places. The faint scratches on a banister, as though something had been dragged. The dust on the floor was uneven, thicker in some areas than others. His mind, ever active, sifted through these details, seeking patterns, connections, the threads of truth woven into the fabric of deception. He reached the bookcase he had discovered the previous day, its shelves sagging under the weight of forgotten volumes. The hidden passage lay behind it, and Poirot pressed the concealed lever, the mechanism clicking softly as the bookcase swung inward. The passage was narrow, its walls damp and streaked with mold, its floor littered with debris. Poirot stepped inside, his cane probing the ground, his senses alert. The air was colder here, and the silence was absolute, as though the manor held its breath. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning for clues, and soon found what he sought: footprints in the dust, faint but unmistakable, leading deeper into the passage. The footprints were small, perhaps those of a woman or a slight man, and they were fresh, the edges crisp despite the damp. Poirot knelt, careful not to disturb the evidence, and examined them closely. The tread was smooth, suggesting fine shoes, not the heavy boots of a groundskeeper or the worn soles of a servant. He followed the prints, his cane tapping softly, until the passage opened into a small chamber, its walls bare except for a single cracked mirror hanging crookedly. The room was empty save for a wooden crate in one corner, its lid ajar. Poirot approached, his heart quickening, and peered inside. The crate contained a bundle of white fabric, silk, like the scrap he had found the day before, along with a small lantern, its wick blackened from recent use. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, his mustache twitching. A ghost who requires a lantern to navigate the dark. Most interesting. He tucked the fabric into his pocket, alongside the earlier scrap, and continued his exploration. The passage branched, one path leading to a staircase that descended into darkness, another curving toward what Poirot deduced was the manor's outer wall. He chose the staircase, descending carefully, his cane probing each step. The air grew colder, the scent of earth and stone stronger, and he emerged into a cellar, its walls lined with rusted wine racks and broken barrels. The footprints continued, here leading to a heavy door that stood slightly ajar, its hinges creaking as Poirot pushed it open. Beyond was a tunnel, its walls shored with ancient timbers, stretching into the fog-shrouded moors. Poirot paused, his mind racing. A secret tunnel, leading from the manor to the outside world. This was no ghostly passage but a human one, used recently if the footprints were any indication. He retraced his steps, noting the tunnel's direction. It seemed to head toward the rose garden, where Beatrice had seen the figure in white. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align, though the picture remained incomplete. Returning to the west wing, Poirot explored the upper floors, finding a locked door at the top of a narrow staircase. The key from Ashford did not fit, but Poirot's nimble fingers detected a faint draft beneath the door, suggesting it led to the tower room where Lady Arabella had supposedly died. He made a note to obtain the correct key, suspecting the room held further secrets. By midday, Poirot returned to the main house, his notebook filled with observations. He joined the household for lunch in the dining room where the atmosphere was strained. Beatrice was pale, her eyes red from crying, and Ashford's hands trembled as he lifted his glass. Victor was present, his expression sullen, while Mrs. Hale maintained her rigid composure. Carver remained absent, still recovering from the séance, and Madame Vera was subdued, her scarves tucked neatly, her gaze wary. Poirot seized the opportunity to probe further. "Mes amis," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "I have explored the west wing, and I find it most illuminating. There are passages, hidden and secret, that suggest not all is as it seems in Blackthorn Manor. Tell me, who among you has ventured there recently?" The table fell silent, the clink of cutlery ceasing. Ashford frowned, his voice uncertain. "No one goes there, Monsieur Poirot. It's been closed off for years. The staff avoid it. It's said to be cursed." Beatrice shivered. "I haven't been there since I was a child. Mother used to warn me away, said it was dangerous." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You're saying someone's sneaking around in there? That's no surprise. I told you it's probably one of the staff stirring up trouble." Mrs. Hale's voice was sharp. "The staff are accounted for, Mr. Victor. I check their duties daily. If someone's in the west wing, it's not one of mine." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "And yet the dust, it tells a story. Footprints, fresh and clear, led through hidden passages. Someone moves in secret, and Hercule Poirot will discover who." Madame Vera spoke, her voice low. "The spirits, Monsieur Poirot, they do not leave footprints. Perhaps you chase shadows when you should listen to the voices of the dead." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Madame, the dead speak only through the living, and the living, they have much to say." The meal continued in uneasy silence, each person lost in their thoughts. Poirot observed them all, noting Beatrice's nervous glances, Victor's clenched jaw, Mrs. Hale's rigid posture, and Madame Vera's calculated calm. After lunch, he requested to see Carver, who was brought to the drawing room, still pale and trembling. "Monsieur Carver," Poirot said gently, "you were much affected by the séance. Tell me, what did you see that caused such fear?" Carver's voice quavered. "It was her, sir, Lady Eleanor. I saw her face in the shadows during the moan. She looked angry. I thought she'd come for me." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging the butler's fear, its authenticity, its possible manipulation. "And the West Wing, monsieur? Have you been there?" Carver shook his head vehemently. "Never, sir. Not in years. It's a bad place. Cursed. Everyone knows it." Poirot dismissed him, his thoughts turning to the footprints, the fabric, the lantern. The West Wing was no haunted relic, but a stage for deception, and he was closing in on the actors. As evening fell, he sat by the fire, in his room, his notebook open, his little gray cells weaving the threads of evidence into a tapestry of truth. Chapter 7. The Locked Room. Riddle. The storm that had battered Blackthorn Manor for days reached a crescendo as night fell, the wind howling across the moors and rattling the manor's ancient windows like a chorus of restless spirits. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing room, his small frame enveloped by a high-backed armchair, his green eyes glinting in the firelight as he sipped a cup of tisane. The room was warm, its heavy drapes drawn against the tempest, but the air carried a chill that no fire could dispel, a reminder of the manor's secrets and the unease that gripped its inhabitants. The scent of burning logs mingled with the faint mustiness of old upholstery, and the occasional crack of thunder punctuated the silence, setting the household on edge. Poirot had spent the day piecing together the fragments of the mystery, the footprints in the West Wing, the scrap of silk, the hidden passage leading to the moors. Each clue pointed to a human hand behind the manor's disturbances, yet the puzzle remained incomplete. The séance, the tale of Lady Arabella, the death of Lady Eleanor, all were threads in a tapestry of deception, and Poirot's little gray cells were working tirelessly to unravel it. Now, as the household gathered for an after-dinner coffee, an event occurred that would elevate the mystery to a new level of intrigue. Lord Reginald Ashford stood by the fireplace, his silver hair disheveled, his face pale with exhaustion. Beatrice sat near the window, her auburn hair catching the candlelight, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. Victor Ashford paced the room, his sharp features set in a scowl, his restless energy barely contained. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, maintained her rigid posture, her gray bun severe, her eyes darting to the door as though expecting an interruption. Mr. Carver, the butler, had returned to his duties, though his hands still trembled as he poured coffee, his face ashen from the previous night's fright. Madame Vera, the medium, sat in a corner, her scarves subdued, her dark eyes watchful, as though sensing the storm's energy mirrored the tension within the manor. Poirot observed them all, his mind cataloging their expressions, their movements, their silences. He had just begun to speak, intending to probe further into the night of Lady Eleanor's death, when a piercing scream echoed through the house, cutting through the storm's roar. The sound came from the upper floors, sharp and desperate, and it sent the room into chaos. Beatrice leapt to her feet, her handkerchief falling to the floor. Ashford's coffee cup clattered to the saucer, and Victor froze mid-pace, his eyes wide. Mrs. Hale's composure cracked, her hand gripping the arm of her chair, while Carver dropped the coffee pot, the porcelain shattering on the floor. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his cane tapping as he moved toward the door. "Quickly, mes amis," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "We must find the source of this cry." The household followed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall as they ascended the grand staircase. The scream had come from the direction of the East Wing, where the family's private quarters were located. The corridors were dim, lit only by flickering sconces, and the storm's fury seemed to shake the very walls. Another scream rang out, fainter now, guiding them to a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. It was the door to the manor's strong room, where the Ashford family kept their most valuable possessions, including the famed Ashford emerald, a gem said to be worth a fortune. Ashford fumbled with a key, his hands shaking, and flung the door open. The room was small, its walls lined with locked cabinets, a single iron safe dominating the center. The window was shuttered, the air heavy with the scent of metal and dust. On the floor, sprawled in a heap, was Mary, one of the maids, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She clutched her apron, her breath coming in gasps. "Mary," Mrs. Hale snapped, kneeling beside her. "What's happened? Speak, girl." Mary's voice trembled. "The emerald. It's gone. I came to dust like you told me, and the safe was open. The box. It's empty." Ashford pushed past, his face ashen, and knelt by the safe. The heavy door stood ajar, its lock intact, the velvet-lined box within indeed empty. The Ashford emerald, a flawless green stone the size of a walnut, was nowhere to be seen. "Impossible," Ashford whispered, his voice raw. The safe was locked. "Only I have the key." Poirot stepped forward, his cane tapping the floor, his eyes scanning the room. "Mon cher Lord Ashford," he said, "nothing is impossible, only improbable. Permit Hercule Poirot to examine this riddle." The household crowded the doorway, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion. Beatrice clung to her father's arm, her eyes filling with tears. Victor's scowl deepened, his hands shoved into his pockets. Mrs. Hale's lips were a thin line, her gaze darting between Mary and the safe. Carver hovered at the back, his trembling hands clutching the doorframe. Madame Vera's voice broke, the silence low and dramatic. "The spirits are angry," she said. "This theft is their doing, a curse upon this house." Poirot's mustache twitched, his expression unreadable. "Madame, if spirits steal emeralds, they are most materialistic. Ghosts. None. This is the work of a human hand, and I shall find it." He began his examination, his movements precise, his eyes missing nothing. The safe's lock showed no signs of tampering, no scratches, no forced entry. The key, Ashford confirmed, had been in his possession all day, kept in a locked drawer in his study. The room itself was secure, the window's shutters bolted from the inside, the door's lock intact. Poirot knelt by the safe, noting the faint smudge of powder on the handle, talc perhaps, or dust disturbed by a careful hand. He examined the floor, finding no footprints save Mary's, which were erratic as though she had stumbled in panic. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Mary," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. "When you entered, the safe was already open." Mary nodded, her voice quavering. "Yes, sir. I came to dust, like Mrs. Hale said. The door was locked. I used my key, but the safe was open and the box empty. I screamed. I couldn't help it." Poirot turned to Ashford. "And this emerald, it is valuable, oui? Who knew of its presence in the safe?" Ashford's voice was hollow. "The family, the senior staff. It's no secret. It's been in the family for generations. But the safe is impregnable. I don't understand how—" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Impregnable, perhaps, but not invulnerable. Tell me, who has access to this room?" Mrs. Hale answered, her voice sharp. "Only myself, Carver, and Lord Ashford. The maids clean under supervision. No one else comes here." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. A locked room, an untampered safe, a missing gem. This was a puzzle worthy of his talents. He questioned each member of the household, their alibis vague and overlapping. Ashford had been in his study, Beatrice in her room, Victor in the billiard room, Mrs. Hale overseeing the kitchen, Carver resting after his ordeal. Madame Vera claimed to have been meditating in her room, though her eyes flickered when pressed for details. As the storm raged on, Poirot returned to the strong room alone, his cane tapping the floor as he paced. He examined the window, the shutters, the walls, searching for hidden panels or secret mechanisms. Finding none, he turned his attention to the safe, running his fingers along its edges, noting the faint scent of oil. A recent lubrication, perhaps. The lock was complex, requiring both a key and a combination, yet it had been opened without force. A duplicate key, perhaps, or a skilled lockpicker, or something more ingenious. He stepped back, his little gray cells working furiously. The theft of the emerald was no ghostly act but a calculated move, likely connected to the disturbances plaguing the manor. The figure in white, the hidden passage, the seance, all were parts of a larger scheme, and the emerald's disappearance was a bold escalation. Someone in Blackthorn Manor was playing a dangerous game, and Poirot was determined to outwit them. As he left the room, locking the door behind him, the storm's thunder shook the manor, and a distant crash echoed from the west wing. Poirot's heart quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. The game, as he called it, was growing more intricate, and Hercule Poirot was ready to meet the challenge. Chapter 8. A murder in the night. The storm that battered Blackthorn Manor showed no sign of relenting. its ferocity transforming the night into a symphony of howling wind and lashing rain. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his silver-headed cane tapping lightly against the marble floor, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a predator on the hunt. The theft of the Ashford emerald had cast a pall over the household, and the air was thick with suspicion, each member of the manor eyeing the others as though searching for the thief among them. The scent of wax and damp stone hung heavy, and the portraits of long-dead Ashfords seemed to watch with silent accusation, their painted eyes following Poirot as he moved toward the library, drawn by a restless need to piece together the puzzle that grew more complex with each passing hour. The library was a cavernous room, its walls lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, the books within coated in a fine layer of dust that spoke of neglect. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room where Lady Eleanor's portrait hung, her blue eyes staring down with an intensity that seemed almost alive. Poirot had intended to examine the portrait again, suspecting it held some clue to the manor's secrets, but his plans were interrupted by a sound that chilled even his resolute heart. A scream, sharp and guttural, cutting through the storm's roar. The scream came from the direction of the drawing room, where the household had gathered after the emerald's theft to discuss the matter under Poirot's watchful eye. He moved swiftly, his small frame belying his agility, his cane tapping as he navigated the dimly lit corridors. The storm's thunder shook the manor, and the sconces flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. As he reached the drawing room, he found chaos. Madame Vera, the medium, lay sprawled on the floor, her scarves tangled around her, her dark eyes wide and unseeing. Blood pooled beneath her head, staining the Aubusson carpet, and her hands clutched at the air, frozen in a final gesture of desperation. Around her, scrawled in what appeared to be chalk, were occult symbols, circles, stars, and strange runes that seemed to pulse in the firelight. Beatrice stood frozen, her hands pressed to her mouth, her auburn hair disheveled. Lord Ashford knelt beside the body, his face ashen, his hands trembling as he checked for a pulse. Victor Ashford stood by the window, his sharp features twisted, in shock, his hands shoved into his pockets. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, was at the door, her rigid posture broken, her eyes wide with horror. Mr. Carver, the butler, had collapsed into a chair, his trembling hands covering his face. Poirot's voice cut through the silence, calm but commanding. "Do not touch anything, mes amis. Step back and let Hercule." Poirot examined this tragedy. He approached the body, his cane tapping softly, his eyes scanning the scene with meticulous precision. Madame Vera's skull was fractured, the wound suggesting a heavy blow from a blunt object. Poirot noted the position of the body, the way her scarves were tangled as though she had struggled. The occult symbols were drawn with care, not haste, their edges precise despite the chaos of the moment. He knelt, careful not to disturb the scene, and examined the chalk marks. They were fresh, the powder still loose, and a faint smudge on the carpet suggested a hurried attempt to wipe something away. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his mustache twitching. "A murder, staged as a ritual. This is no work of spirits, but of a mind most cunning." Ashford's voice was raw, his eyes fixed on the body. "Monsieur Poirot, how could this happen? She was with us only moments ago, talking of the emerald, insisting it was the curse at work. Who could do this?" Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the positions of each person. "When did you last see Madame Vera alive?" Beatrice's voice trembled, her eyes filling with tears. "We were all here discussing the emerald. She said she felt a presence, that the spirits were angry. She stepped out to fetch her shawl from the library, said she was cold. Then we heard the scream." Victor's scowl deepened, his voice sharp. "This is madness, Poirot. First the emerald, now this. Someone's trying to tear this house apart." Mrs. Hale's voice was clipped, though her hands shook. "I was in the kitchen checking the staff. I came running when I heard the scream. This is beyond comprehension." Carver's voice was barely audible, muffled by his hands. "It's the curse. Lady Arabella, Lady Eleanor, they're punishing us." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his tone firm. Monsieur Carver, curses do not wield blunt objects. This is murder, and murder requires a motive. We shall find it. He began his examination, moving with the precision of a surgeon. The murder weapon was not immediately apparent, but a heavy bronze candlestick was missing from the mantel, its absence noted by a ring of dust. Poirot's fingers brushed the carpet, finding a faint trace of wax near the body, suggesting the candlestick had been used and removed. The occult symbols intrigued him. They were not random, but drawn with knowledge, perhaps to evoke fear or to point to a specific narrative. The curse of Lady Arabella, perhaps, or a connection to Lady Eleanor's death. Poirot questioned each member of the household, their alibis fragmented by the chaos of the moment. Ashford had been in the drawing room, pacing by the fire. Beatrice had been seated, lost in thought. Victor claimed to have stepped out to the billiard room briefly, returning just before the scream. Mrs. Hale had been in the kitchen, though no staff could fully corroborate her timing. Carver had been in the pantry, fetching more coffee, his absence convenient. The maids and cook, summoned by the scream, were in a state of panic, their stories muddled but consistent. They had been below stairs, unaware of the events above. Poirot moved to the library where Madame Vera had gone for her shawl. The room was as he had left it, but the portrait of Lady Eleanor seemed to loom larger, its eyes following him. He found the shawl draped over a chair, but beside it was a small notebook, its pages filled with Madame Vera's spidery handwriting. The notes detailed her observations of the household, her suspicions of hidden motives, and a cryptic reference to the one who knows the truth. Poirot tucked the notebook into his pocket, his mind racing. Returning to the drawing room, he gathered the household, their faces pale in the flickering light. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady. "This murder is no act of spirits but of calculation. Madame Vera Sar Bibia system. It appears your message was cut off. Based on your request, I'll continue generating the content for Chapter 8. A. Murder in the Night of Hercule Poirot and the Haunted Manor, aiming for approximately 10,000 words, focusing on the narrative, dialogue, and atmospheric description, as per your instructions. Below is the continuation of the chapter, ensuring the content remains within the requested scope and adheres to the guidelines provided. Knows too much." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he read the words, his mind already weaving connections between the notebook, the emerald's theft, and the disturbances plaguing Blackthorn Manor. The medium had been observant, perhaps too observant, and her death suggested she had stumbled upon a truth someone wished to keep hidden. Poirot's investigation continued through the night, the storm's relentless fury mirroring the turmoil within the manor. He examined the drawing room's windows, noting their heavy bolts were secure, ruling out an outside intruder. The door to the room had been unlocked, accessible to anyone in the house, and the absence of the candlestick suggested the murderer had taken it to conceal their actions. Poirot's fingers brushed the edge of the table where the séance had taken place, recalling the theatrical moan, the trembling table, the cold gust of air. The murder, like the disturbances, was staged to evoke fear, to point to the supernatural, but Poirot's little gray cells rejected such explanations. Fear was a tool, wielded by a human hand, and he was determined to find its owner. He requested the household remain in the drawing room while he conducted a thorough search of the adjacent rooms. The library, the billiard room, the conservatory, all were empty, their shadows undisturbed save for the faint scuff marks Poirot had noted earlier, now taking on new significance. He descended to the cellar, following the tunnel he had discovered in the west wing, its damp walls and creaking timbers a stark contrast to the manor's polished interiors. The tunnel's exit to the moors was concealed by a thicket of gorse, invisible from the outside, and Poirot found fresh mud on the stone floor, suggesting recent use. The footprints matched those in the west wing, small, smooth-soled, deliberate. He collected a sample of the mud, wrapping it in a handkerchief, and retraced his steps, his mind turning over the implications. The tunnel was a means of covert movement, a way to stage apparitions or steal emeralds without detection. But who had used it, and why? Back in the drawing room, Poirot observed the household's strained faces. Beatrice's eyes were red-rimmed, her handkerchief sodden with tears. Ashford sat heavily, his hands clasped as though in prayer, his gaze distant. Victor's restlessness had turned to agitation, his pacing now confined to a corner, his sharp features taut with suspicion. Mrs. Hale's composure was fraying, her hands fidgeting with the keys at her waist. Carver, still pale, muttered about, curses, his fear palpable. Poirot's presence seemed to anchor them, his calm authority a counterpoint to their panic. "Monsieur Poirot," Ashford said, his voice hoarse. "This is madness. First the emerald, now Madame Vera. Is there no end to this nightmare?" Chapter 9. The alibi of the heir. The storm that had besieged Blackthorn Manor through the night had subsided by morning, leaving a heavy fog that clung to the moors and shrouded the manor's gray stone facade in a ghostly veil. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of his guest room, his small frame silhouetted against the dim light, his green eyes scanning the mist-soaked landscape. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, and the manor itself seemed to groan under the weight of its secrets. The murder of Madame Vera, coupled with the theft of the Ashford emerald, had cast a pall over the household, and the tension was palpable, like a taut string ready to snap. Poirot's little gray cells were in overdrive, weaving together the threads of the mystery, the hidden passage, the silk scraps, the occult symbols, and now a brutal killing that pointed to a desperate mind. Breakfast was a somber affair, served in the small dining room where the fire struggled to banish the chill. Lord Reginald Ashford sat at the head of the table, his silver hair disheveled, his face etched with grief and exhaustion. Beatrice Ashford, pale and drawn, picked at her porridge, her blue eyes red-rimmed from crying. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, maintained her rigid posture, though her hands betrayed a slight tremble as she poured tea. Mr. Carver, the butler, was present but subdued, his trembling hands carefully arranging the silverware, his face still pale from the previous night's horrors. Victor Ashford, the nephew and heir, was conspicuously late, his absence noted by Poirot with a twitch of his mustache. Poirot sipped his tisane, his movements precise, his mind focused on the task ahead. The murder had escalated the stakes, and he was determined to probe deeper into the alibis and motives of the household, particularly Victor, whose restless demeanor and vague account of his whereabouts during the emerald's theft and Madame Vera's death raised suspicions. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding, "the events of last night demand our utmost attention. A life has been taken, and the truth must be uncovered. I shall speak with each of you again, and I ask for your candor. The smallest detail may be the key to this puzzle." Ashford nodded, his voice hoarse. "Anything you need, Monsieur Poirot? This tragedy is too much. First Eleanor, now Madame Vera. I fear for us all." Beatrice's voice trembled, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Monsieur Poirot, do you think? Could the curse be real?" Madame Vera said the spirits were angry. What if she was right? Poirot's smile was gentle but firm. "Mademoiselle, the only curse in Blackthorn Manor is the curse of fear, wielded by a human hand. Madame Vera's death was no act of spirits but of calculation. We shall find the one responsible." Mrs. Hale's lips thinned, her voice sharp. "I've told the staff to stay calm, Monsieur Poirot, but they're terrified. Mary's talking of leaving, and the cook swears she heard weeping again last night. This house is falling apart." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Madame Hale, fear is a powerful weapon, but it is not invincible. Hercule Poirot shall restore order. Rest assured." As breakfast ended, Victor entered, his sharp features set in a scowl, his dark hair slicked back but slightly askew, as though he had dressed in haste. He dropped into a chair, ignoring the cold porridge, and fixed Poirot with a defiant stare. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his tone clipped. "Couldn't sleep with all this nonsense about ghosts and murders." Poirot's mustache twitched, his gaze unyielding. Monsieur Victor, your absence is noted, but your presence now is most welcome. I would speak with you, if you permit, about the events of last night and the night of the emerald's theft. Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. Let's get it over with. Poirot led Victor to the library, where Lady Eleanor's portrait loomed overhead, her blue eyes seeming to follow their movements. The room was quiet, the storm's aftermath leaving an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant drip of water from a leaky roof. Poirot settled into a chair, his cane resting across his knees, his notebook open before him. Victor paced, his hands shoved into his pockets, his restlessness a stark contrast to Poirot's calm. Monsieur Victor, Poirot began, his voice measured. You are the heir to Blackthorn Manor, oui? A position of great responsibility, but also of great burden given the estate's troubles. Victor snorted, pausing by the window. Troubles? That's putting it mildly. This place is a money pit. My uncle's obsessed with keeping it, but it's bleeding him dry. If it were up to me, I'd sell it tomorrow and be done with it. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his fingers steepled. And yet you remain. Why, monsieur, if the manor is such a burden? Victor's gaze flickered, a shadow crossing his face. Family duty, I suppose. Uncle Reginald's got no one else with Beatrice so fragile. And there's the inheritance. The estate's worth something, even if it's falling apart. Poirot nodded, his tone gentle but probing. And the Ashford emerald, it is part of that inheritance, no? Its theft must be a great loss to you. Victor's scowl deepened. If you're accusing me, Poirot, just say it. I didn't take the damn thing. I was in the billiard room when Mary screamed about the safe. Ask anyone. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I accuse no one, monsieur, but I observe. Your alibi for the theft is vague, and for the murder of Madame Vera, you say you were in the billiard room again, alone. A convenient solitude, no? Victor's hands clenched into fists, his voice rising. What are you getting at? I didn't kill her. She was a fraud, stirring up trouble with her ghost stories. Maybe someone got fed up with her nonsense. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Perhaps, but Madame Vera's notebook suggests she knew something dangerous. Tell me, monsieur, what was your relationship with Lady Eleanor? Victor hesitated, his eyes darting to the portrait. She was my aunt. Distant, always going on about curses and ghosts. She wasn't right in the head, especially at the end. That Damian system. The chapter was cut off mid-sentence. Below is the continuation of Chapter 9, the alibi of the heir, maintaining the narrative flow, dialogue, and atmospheric tone of an Agatha Christie mystery, aiming for approximately $10,000, words as requested. The content adheres strictly to your instructions, avoiding any extraneous notes or explanations. Well, you know how it ended. She was difficult, always lost in her books and her cursed nonsense. I tried to talk sense into her, but she wouldn't. Listen. Poirot's fingers tapped his cane, his gaze unwavering. And the night of her death, monsieur? Where were you after the dinner party? Victor stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. I told you before. I was in my room, reading. Went to bed early. It was a long night, and I wasn't in the mood for more of Eleanor's ramblings. Poirot noted the slight tremor in Victor's voice, the way his eyes avoided the portrait. You were alone, you say? No one to confirm this? Victor's face reddened, his voice sharp. What is this, an interrogation? I didn't kill my aunt, Poirot. The coroner said it was an accident. Why drag it up now? Because, monsieur, Poirot said softly, the past and present are connected. Lady Eleanor's death, the emeralds, theft, Madame Vera's murder. These are not isolated events. Someone weaves a web of deception, and I must know where each thread leads. Victor turned away, staring out the window into the fog. You're wasting your time, Poirot. This house is cursed, or someone's making it look that way. That's all I know. Poirot closed his notebook, rising from his chair. Thank you, Monsieur Victor. Your candor is appreciated, though perhaps incomplete. We shall speak again. Leaving Victor in the library, Poirot made his way to the drawing room, where Beatrice sat alone, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale. The fire had died to embers, and the room felt colder, the air heavy with unspoken fears. Poirot settled opposite her, his expression gentle. "Mademoiselle Beatrice," he said, "you loved your mother deeply, oui? Tell me more of her final days. What troubled her so?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, her voice soft. "She was obsessed with the curse, Monsieur Poirot. She spent hours in here, reading old journals, looking for proof of Lady Arabella's story. She believed the manor was haunted, that Arabella's spirit demanded justice. She saw things, shadows, figures. She told me once that Arabella warned her to leave or she'd die." Poirot's mustache twitched, his mind cataloging her words. "And you, mademoiselle, did you see these figures?" Beatrice hesitated, her fingers twisting her handkerchief. "Not then. But after she died, I saw something. In the rose garden. A figure in white with mother's face. I thought it was her, come back to warn us." Poirot nodded, his tone soothing. "A vision born of grief, perhaps, or a vision created by another. Tell me, who else was close to your mother?" Beatrice's eyes flickered. "Father, of course, they were devoted, despite her troubles, Victor. He argued with her often, said she was wasting money on the manor. Mrs. Hale was loyal, always trying to keep mother calm. Carver was devoted too, but he's so nervous now. I don't know what to make of him." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And Madame Vera, how did your mother know her?" Beatrice frowned. "She didn't, not really. I invited Madame Vera after mother died, hoping she could contact her spirit. I found her through a friend in London. She seemed genuine at first." Poirot filed this away, his mind turning to the medium's notebook, her cryptic notes about hidden motives. He thanked Beatrice and moved to the housekeeper's office, where Mrs. Hale sat at a desk, her gray bun tight, her face a mask of controlled anger. Chapter 10. Shadows of the Past. The fog that enveloped Blackthorn Manor had thickened into a suffocating blanket by mid-morning, cloaking the moors in a gray haze that seemed to seep into the very walls of the ancient edifice. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, his small frame dwarfed by the towering shelves of dusty tomes, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man on the cusp of revelation. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather and mildew, and the faint creak of the manor's timbers underscored the oppressive silence. The murder of Madame Vera, the theft of the Ashford emerald, and the persistent tales of ghostly apparitions had woven a tapestry of fear and suspicion, and Poirot's little gray cells were working tirelessly to unravel its threads. The discovery of the hidden passage, the silk scraps, and the occult symbols had pointed to a human hand behind the manor's disturbances, but the motive remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of the past. Poirot had resolved to delve deeper into the history of Blackthorn Manor, particularly the circumstances surrounding Lady Eleanor's death, which seemed to be the catalyst for the current chaos. The library, with its trove of family records and journals, was the logical place. To begin, he had requested Lord Ashford's permission to access the manor's archives, and Ashford, though weary and shaken by the recent murder, had agreed, providing a key to a locked cabinet in the library's far corner. Eleanor spent hours here, Ashford had said, his voice heavy with grief. She was obsessed with the past, with the curse of Lady Arabella. Perhaps you'll find something to explain all this. Now, as Poirot unlocked the cabinet, his fingers deft and precise, he felt the weight of the manor's history pressing down upon him. The cabinet creaked open, revealing a collection of leather-bound journals, yellowed letters, and faded documents, some dating back centuries. He selected a journal marked with the Ashford crest, its pages brittle but legible, and settled into a chair by the fire, his cane resting across his knees. The portrait of Lady Eleanor loomed overhead, her blue eyes seeming to watch him, her expression a mix of sorrow and defiance. The journal belonged to Lady Eleanor herself, its entries spanning the final year of her life. Poirot read with meticulous care, his eyes scanning the elegant, looping handwriting. The early entries were mundane, detailing household matters and social engagements. But as the months progressed, the tone shifted, Eleanor wrote of her growing fascination with the curse of Lady Arabella, the 17th century ancestor who had died in the West Wing's tower room. "The story haunts me," she wrote. "Arabella's betrayal, her imprisonment, her death. I feel her presence in these walls, a shadow that demands justice. I must uncover the truth." Poirot's mustache twitched, his mind cataloging the implications. Eleanor's obsession had been more than a passing fancy. It had consumed her, driving her to search the Manor's archives for clues. One entry, dated a month before her death, caught his attention. "I have found letters in the attic hidden in a trunk. They speak of a secret kept from the family, a shame buried deep. Arabella's lover was not a poet, as the legend claims, but a member of the household, a servant named Thomas Wren. Their affair was discovered and Edmund Ashford's wrath was merciless. I believe Arabella's spirit seeks retribution, and I fear I am next." Poirot paused, his fingers tracing the words. A secret affair, a servant lover, a vengeful husband. These were the ingredients of a tragedy that echoed through the centuries. He set the journal aside and retrieved a bundle of letters from the cabinet, their wax seals cracked but intact. The letters were written by Thomas Wren, addressed to Arabella, their tone passionate and desperate. "My love," one read, "we must flee this cursed place. Edmund suspects and his rage will destroy us both. Meet me in the West Wing at midnight, and we shall escape to a new life." The final letter, dated days before Arabella's death, was unfinished, ending mid-sentence. "If he finds us, I fear." Poirot's heart quickened, his little gray cells racing. The letter suggested a motive for Arabella's death beyond mere jealousy, a scandal that threatened the Ashford name. Had Eleanor's discovery of these letters put her in danger? Had she confronted someone, perhaps a descendant of those involved, who wished to keep the secret buried? He moved to the attic, a dusty warren of crates and cobwebs, accessible by a narrow staircase behind the library. The air was thick, the scent of mold overpowering, and the faint light from a single window barely pierced the gloom. Poirot navigated the cluttered space, his cane tapping the floorboards, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. He found the trunk Eleanor had mentioned, its lock rusted but recently disturbed, the dust around it smudged as though it had been opened. Inside were more letters, a locket containing a miniature portrait of a young man, presumably Thomas Wren, and a small diary, its pages filled with Eleanor's notes. "The family knows," she wrote. "Someone still guards the secret, and they will stop at nothing to protect it. I must be careful." Poirot tucked the diary into his pocket, his mind racing. Eleanor's death, ruled an accident, was looking more like murder, a silencing of her inquiries into the past. The emeralds theft and Madame Vera's death were likely connected, attempts to distract or eliminate those who came too close to the truth. But who in the household had the most to lose? Victor, the heir, with his financial troubles and desire to sell the manor? Mrs. Hale, the loyal housekeeper who knew every corner of the house? Or someone else, hidden in the shadows? Returning to the main house, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room where the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Ashford looked haggard, Beatrice fragile, Victor sullen, Mrs. Hale rigid, and Carver trembling. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding. "I have uncovered secrets from the past that shed light on the present. Lady Eleanor was searching for the truth about Lady Arabella, and she found something dangerous. Tell me, who among you knew of her discoveries?" Ashford's face paled, his voice hoarse. "She spoke of the curse, Monsieur Poirot, but I thought it was her illness talking. I didn't know she'd found anything." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "She told me about Arabella, but not about letters. She said the manor was cursed, that we were all in danger." Victor's scowl deepened. "More nonsense. She was obsessed, Poirot. If she found something, it probably drove her to that balcony." Hale's voice was sharp. "Lady Eleanor was troubled, but she was no fool. If she found letters, she kept them to herself. I knew nothing of it." Carver's hand shook, his voice barely audible. I helped her carry books from the library sometimes, but she never showed me letters. She was frightened toward the end. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind noting their reactions, their denials, their deflections. He probed further, asking about the night of Eleanor's death, the dinner party, the guests. Beatrice mentioned a detail that caught his attention. Mother argued with someone that night in the hall. I couldn't hear who, but she was upset, almost crying. Poirot's heart quickened. An argument, a secret, a death. The pieces were falling into place. He spent the afternoon searching the Manor's upper floors, focusing on the tower room where Arabella had died. The door was still locked, but Ashford provided the key, and Poirot entered, finding a small, barren chamber with a single window, overlooking the moors. The floor was dusty, but fresh scuff marks suggested recent visitors, and a faint scent of lavender lingered, out of place in the musty air. As night fell, Poirot sat by the fire in his room, his notebook filled with sketches and timelines. The letters, the diary, the argument. They pointed to a motive rooted in the past, a secret worth killing for. The emerald's theft and Madame Vera's murder were distractions, meant to sow fear and confusion. Someone in Blackthorn Manor was desperate to keep the truth buried, and Poirot was determined to unearth it. Chapter 11. The Trap is Set. The fog that had cloaked Blackthorn Manor for days began to lift as evening descended, revealing the stark outlines of the moors under a sky bruised with storm clouds. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, his small frame silhouetted against the flickering firelight, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a chess master contemplating a decisive move. The air was heavy with the scent of burning logs and the faint mustiness that permeated the manor, a reminder of its age and secrets. The murder of Madame Vera, the theft of the Ashford emerald, and the revelations from Lady Eleanor's journals had brought the mystery into sharp focus, and Poirot was ready to take control of the narrative. His little gray cells had woven a pattern from the clues, the hidden passage, the silk scraps, the occult symbols, the letters in the attic, and he suspected the key to the puzzle lay not in the supernatural, but in the human heart, driven by greed, fear, or vengeance. The household was on edge, the weight of recent events pressing down like the manor's ancient timbers. Lord Reginald Ashford sat by the fire, his silver hair disheveled, his face etched with exhaustion and grief. Beatrice Ashford perched on a sofa, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her blue eyes darting nervously as she clutched a lace handkerchief. Victor Ashford leaned against the mantel, his sharp features set in a scowl, his restless energy barely contained. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, stood near the door, her gray bun severe, her posture rigid, but her hands betraying a slight tremble. Mr. Carver, the butler, hovered near the sideboard, his trembling hands arranging coffee cups with exaggerated care, his face still pale from the horrors of the past days. The absence of Madame Vera was a palpable void, her death a stark reminder of the danger lurking within the manor's walls. Poirot had decided to set a trap, a calculated move to provoke the culprit into revealing themselves. The disturbances, the theft, the murder, all pointed to a deliberate campaign to sow fear and confusion, likely to conceal a deeper motive tied to Lady Eleanor's death and the secrets of the Ashford family. He had observed a pattern in the hauntings, the figure in white, the moved objects, the noises in the night, all staged to evoke the curse of Lady Arabella. The séance had been a performance, and Poirot suspected one member of the household had orchestrated it, using the medium's theatrics to their advantage. Now, with Madame Vera silenced, the perpetrator was growing bolder, and Poirot intended to exploit that boldness. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding, cutting through the tense silence of the drawing room. "The events in Blackthorn Manor have reached a critical point. A life has been taken, a treasure stolen, and fear has taken root. But Hercule Poirot does not believe in curses or ghosts. I believe in the truth, and the truth is close. Tonight we shall hold another séance to confront the so-called spirits and demand answers." Beatrice gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. "Another séance, Monsieur Poirot?" after what happened to Madame Vera. It's too dangerous. Ashford's voice was hoarse, his eyes wary. Monsieur Poirot, is this wise? The last séance ended in tragedy. What do you hope to achieve? Poirot's mustache twitched, his smile enigmatic. Mon cher Lord Ashford, I hope to achieve clarity. The spirits, if they exist, will speak, but I suspect it is the living who have much to say. I shall conduct the séance myself, with your permission, to ensure all is as it seems. Victor snorted, his arms crossed. This is absurd, Poirot. You're playing into their game. Ghosts, curses, all of it. You'll just scare the staff more. Mrs. Hale's voice was sharp, her hands clutching her keys. I agree with Mr. Victor. The staff are already at their wits' end. Another séance will only make things worse. Carver's hands trembled, his voice barely audible. Sir, I beg you, don't do this. The spirit, they're angry. I saw her, Lady Eleanor, in the shadows. She'll come again. Poirot raised a hand, silencing their protests. Mes amis, fear is the enemy of truth. This séance will not summon spirits but reveal motives. I ask you all to attend and to bring your courage. We shall meet at midnight, in this very room. The key. Household reluctantly agreed, their faces a mix of dread and skepticism. Poirot spent the afternoon preparing, his movements precise, his mind focused. He examined the drawing room, noting the position of the furniture, the candles, the windows. He found a faint scratch on the floor near the table, suggesting a hidden mechanism, perhaps used during the previous séance to create the trembling effect. He tested the windows, finding one with a loose latch, easily opened from the outside. In a corner, hidden behind a drape, he discovered a small vial of white powder, chalk, identical to that used for the occult symbols around Madame Vera's body. He pocketed it, his suspicions growing. Poirot then visited the west wing, returning to the hidden passage he had discovered. The footprints were still visible, their edges softened by time but unmistakable. He followed them to the cellar where the tunnel led to the moors and found a fresh smudge of mud near the exit, suggesting recent use. The silk scrap he had found earlier matched the fabric of a dress he had seen in the laundry, a maid's uniform, altered to resemble a ghostly gown. The pieces were aligning, and Poirot's trap was designed to force the culprit's hand. At midnight, the household gathered in the drawing room, the air thick with tension. The fire was low, the candles arranged in a circle on the table, their flames casting flickering shadows. Poirot stood at the head, his small frame commanding, his cane resting by his side. We begin, he said, his voice steady. Join hands and let us call upon the spirits of Blackthorn Manor. Lady Eleanor, Lady Arabella, if you are here, speak to us. The room grew colder, the candles flickering as though stirred by an unseen breath. Poirot's eyes darted around, the circle noting Beatrice's trembling hands, Ashford's clenched jaw, Victor's scowl, Mrs. Hale's rigid posture, and Carver's pale face. He began a chant, mimicking Madame Vera's theatrical style, his voice rising and falling. Spirits, reveal your truth. Tell us of the wrongs done in this house, of the secrets kept in shadow. A low moan filled the room, similar to the one from the first séance, and Beatrice gasped, her grip tightening. Carver's eyes widened, his breath coming in short gasps. Poirot continued, his tone deliberate, his words chosen to provoke. Lady Eleanor, you sought the truth about Arabella. Did you find it? Did someone silence you for it? The moan grew louder and the table trembled, eliciting a cry from Beatrice. Poirot's eyes caught a flicker of movement near the door, a shadow, fleeting but deliberate. He pressed on, his voice rising. And Madame Vera, you saw too much. No? Who feared your knowledge? Speak and let the guilty tremble. A sudden crash echoed from the hall, and the candles flared, their flames stretching upward. The household broke the circle, their faces pale with fear. Poirot moved swiftly, his cane tapping as he crossed to the door, flinging it open. There in the dim light of the corridor stood Clara, one of the maids, her face pale, her hands clutching a bundle of white fabric. She froze, her eyes wide, as Poirot's voice cut through the silence. "Mademoiselle Clara," he said, his tone calm but unyielding, "you have been most active in the shadows, no? Step forward, and let us discuss the role you play in this masquerade." Clara's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she dropped the fabric. A white dress, stained with mud. The household gasped, their eyes darting between Clara and Poirot. The trap had been sprung, and the truth was beginning to emerge. Chapter 12. The Unmasking of the Ghost. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor was a tableau of tension, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the faces of the assembled household. Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway, his small frame, commanding despite the chaos of the moment, his green eyes fixed on Clara, the maid, who stood frozen in the corridor, clutching a mud-stained white dress. The air was thick with the scent of wax and fear, the storm's aftermath leaving a damp chill that seemed to seep from the manor's ancient walls. The trap Poirot had set during the staged séance had borne fruit, catching Clara in the act, and now the pieces of the mystery, the emerald's theft, Madame Vera's murder, the ghostly apparitions, were falling into place. Poirot's little, gray cells hummed with anticipation, ready to unravel the web of deception that had ensnared Blackthorn Manor. Clara's face was pale, her brown eyes wide with panic, her hands trembling as the white dress slipped to the floor. The household, crowded behind Poirot, their gasps and murmurs filling the silence. Lord Reginald Ashford's voice was hoarse, his silver hair disheveled. "Clara, what is this? What have you done?" Beatrice clutched her father's arm, her auburn hair loose, her blue eyes brimming with tears. "Monsieur Poirot, is she the one behind the hauntings?" Victor Ashford's scowl deepened, his sharp features taut with suspicion. "I knew it was one of the staff. Playing ghost to scare us out of the manor, were you?" Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, stepped forward, her gray bun severe, her voice sharp. "Clara, explain yourself. I trusted you, and now this?" Mr. Carver, the butler, hovered at the back, his trembling hands clutching the doorframe, his face ashen. "It's the cursed," he muttered. "She's part of it, stirring up the spirits." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture silencing the room. "Mes amis, let us not leap to conclusions. Mademoiselle Clara, step into the light, s'il vous plaît, and tell us why you carry this dress stained with the mud of the moors." Clara hesitated, her breath hitching, then stepped into the drawing room, her eyes darting between Poirot and the others. I didn't mean no harm," she stammered, her voice thick with a Devon accent. I was told to do it." Poirot's mustache twitched, his tone calm but unyielding. "Told by whom, mademoiselle? And for what purpose? Speak, for the truth is close, and Hercule Poirot will have it." Clara's shoulders slumped, her hands twisting her apron. It was for money, sir. Someone paid me to dress up, to move things, to make it seem like the manor was haunted. They said it was to help sell the place, to scare Lord Ashford into leaving." Ashford's face reddened, his voice rising. "Sell the manor? Who would dare? Clara, name this person." Clara's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely audible. "I can't say, my lord. They threatened me, said they'd ruin me if I told." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind racing. "Threats, mademoiselle? This is most serious, but let us examine the evidence. This dress, it matches the figure seen in the rose garden, non? And the passage in the west wing with footprints matching your shoes. These were your doing?" Clara nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, sir. I used the passage to come and go, to make it look like a ghost. I wore the dress, lit the lantern, moved things at night. But I swear I didn't steal the emerald, and I didn't kill Madame Vera." Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. "And the candlestick, the one missing from the drawing room. Did you take it after striking Madame Vera?" Clara's eyes widened, her voice a desperate cry. "No, sir. I never touched her. I was in the kitchen when she was killed, helping with the dishes. Ask the cook, she'll tell you." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging her words, her fear, her partial confession. He turned to the household, his voice steady. "Mes amis, Clara has revealed part of the truth, but not all. She is a pawn in a larger game. manipulated by one who seeks to control Blackthorn Manor. The emerald, the murder, the hauntings, all are connected, and the mastermind is among us. Beatrice gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. Among us? Monsieur Poirot, who could it be? Victor's voice was sharp, his hands clenched. This is nonsense. She's lying to save herself. She stole the emerald, killed the medium, and now she's spinning tales. Mrs. Hale's eyes flashed, her voice cold. Clara's been with us for years. She's not clever enough for this. Someone put her up to it, and I want to know who. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Patience, Madame Hale. The truth is like a fine wine. It requires time to reveal its bouquet. Clara, tell us more of this person who paid you. A voice, a figure, anything? Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. It was... Notes, sir. Left in my room, with money. Instructions to move things, to wear the dress, to make noises. I never saw them, I swear. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind turning to the notebook he had found in Madame Veyra's possessions, its cryptic entries about the one who knows the truth. He stepped closer to Clara, his voice gentle but probing. And these notes, mademoiselle, do you have them still? Clara nodded, her hands fumbling in her apron pocket. She produced a crumpled piece of paper, its handwriting neat but unremarkable. This was the last one, she said, handing it to Poirot. It told me to be in the garden tonight during the séance. Poirot read the note, his heart quickening. Wear the white dress. Appear in the garden at midnight. The plan nears its end. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the precision suggested a mind accustomed to control. He pocketed the note, his mind racing. The séance had been a trap not only for Clara, but for the mastermind who had underestimated Poirot's cunning. He turned to the household, his cane tapping the floor. Mes amis, Clara is but a tool, used to create the illusion of a haunting. The emerald's theft, Madame Veyra's murder, these are the work of one who seeks to drive you from this manor, perhaps to claim it for themselves. But Hercule Poirot has seen through the masquerade, and the truth is close. Ashford's voice was raw, his eyes searching Poirot's face. Monsieur Poirot, can you name this person? Can you end this nightmare? Poirot's smile was serene, his confidence unshaken. Mon cher Lord Ashford, the night is not yet over, but the dawn of truth approaches. Clara, you will remain under my watch, and we shall see who comes to claim their pawn. He instructed Mrs. Hale to keep Clara in the housekeeper's office, under lock and key until morning. The household dispersed, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion, their trust in one another shattered. Poirot returned to the drawing room, examining the scene of the séance once more. The scratch on the floor, the loose window latch, the vial of chalk, all pointed to a carefully staged deception, and Clara's confession confirmed it. But the murder and the emerald's theft were bolder acts, requiring a motive deeper than mere mischief. Poirot spent the night in his room, his notebook open, his fire casting shadows on the walls. He sketched a timeline of the events. Lady Eleanor's death, the hauntings, the emerald's theft, Madame Veyra's murder, Clara's role. The notes left for Clara suggested a mastermind with access to the manor's inner workings, someone who knew its passages and its secrets. Victor's financial troubles made him a suspect, but his alibi, though weak, held. Mrs. Hale's control over the staff was absolute, but her loyalty seemed genuine. Carver's fear was real, but his trembling hands hinted at knowledge unspoken. Beatrice's grief was authentic, but her visions of her mother could be manipulated. As dawn broke, the fog lifting to reveal the moor's stark beauty, Poirot's mind was clear. Clara was a pawn, but the king, or queen of this game, was still hidden. The unmasking of the ghost was only the beginning, and Poirot was ready to confront the true orchestrator of Blackthorn Manor's nightmare. Chapter 13. The Emerald Secret. The dawn light filtered through the fog, casting a pale glow over Blackthorn Manor's weathered stone facade, its towers standing sentinel against the rolling moors. Hercule Poirot stood in the entrance hall, his small frame immaculate in a charcoal suit, his silver-headed cane tapping lightly against the marble floor. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and wax, the manor's ancient timbers creaking as though whispering secrets. The unmasking of Clara as the ghostly figure in white had been a triumph, but Poirot knew she was merely a pawn in a larger game. The theft of the Ashford emerald, the murder of Madame Vera, and the staged hauntings pointed to a mastermind within the household, and Poirot's little gray cells were poised to expose them. The note Clara had produced, with its precise handwriting and cryptic instructions, was a vital clue, and Poirot was determined to trace it to its source. The household gathered in the drawing room for breakfast, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Lord Reginald Ashford sat at the head of the table, his silver hair disheveled, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Beatrice Ashford, pale and fragile, sipped tea with trembling hands, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her blue eyes darting nervously. Victor Ashford slouched in his chair, his sharp features set in a scowl, his restless energy barely contained. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, oversaw the serving with rigid precision, her gray bun severe, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. Mr. Carver, the butler, moved slowly, his trembling hands arranging plates, his face still pale from the events of the past days. Clara, under Mrs. Hale's watchful eye, was confined to the housekeeper's office, her confession a shock that lingered like a storm cloud. Poirot sipped his tisane, his movements precise, his green eyes scanning the room. The tension was palpable, each person aware that the truth was closing in. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "Clara's role in the ghostly apparitions has revealed much, but the heart of this mystery remains hidden. The Ashford emerald. It is not merely a jewel, non. It holds a secret, one that drives someone to theft, to murder, to fear. I ask you now, what do you know of this emerald's history?" Ashford's brow furrowed, his voice weary. "Monsieur Poirot, the emerald is a family heirloom, passed down since the 18th century. It's valuable, yes, but a secret? I know of none. It was kept in the strong room for safekeeping, nothing more." Beatrice's voice was soft, trembling. "Mother used to say it was special, that it was tied to the Manor's history. She mentioned it once when she was reading about Lady Arabella. But she never explained." Victor snorted, pushing his plate aside. "It's just a rock, Poirot. Worth a fortune, sure, but that's all. Someone stole it to sell it, plain and simple. Probably Clara, or whoever she's covering for." Mrs. Hale's lips thinned, her voice sharp. "Clara's no thief, Mr. Victor. She's a foolish girl led astray, but I'd stake my reputation on her honesty." The housekeeper's defense was fierce, but Poirot noted the way her eyes avoided his, a flicker of unease. Carver's hands trembling, he spilled a drop of tea, his voice low. "The emerald. It's cursed, sir. The staff whisper about it. They say it brought misfortune to Lady Eleanor and now to us all." Poirot's mustache twitched, his smile serene but probing. "A curse, Monsieur Carver? Or perhaps a story woven to conceal a truth? Let us explore this further. Lord Ashford, may I examine the strong room again?" Ashford nodded, his hands shaking as he rose. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Anything to end this madness." Poirot led the way to the strong room, a small windowed chamber in the east wing, its walls lined with locked cabinets, the iron safe still standing ajar from the theft. The air was heavy with the scent of metal and dust, and the faint light revealed no new clues at first glance. Poirot examined the safe, his fingers tracing the lock, noting the absence of scratches or tampering. The velvet-lined interior was empty, but he knelt, his sharp eyes catching a glint in the lock's mechanism, a small green shard barely visible. He extracted it with tweezers, holding it to the light. It was a fragment of the emerald, confirming its presence in the safe before the theft. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, his mind racing. "A jewel shattered yet stolen whole. This suggests a purpose beyond mere theft, a purpose tied to the emerald's secret." He turned to Ashford, his tone gentle but insistent. "Mon cher, the emerald's history. Where did it come from? Who first brought it to Blackthorn Manor?" Ashford frowned, his eyes distant. It was acquired by Sir Henry Ashford in 1720, during his travels in India. He was a merchant, said to have traded with a prince for it. The family records are vague, but it's been a symbol of pride ever since. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind turning to Lady Eleanor's journals, her references to the curse, and her research into the Manor's past. He returned to the library where the portrait of Lady Eleanor loomed, her blue eyes seeming to follow him. He retrieved her journal from the locked cabinet, flipping to an entry he had marked. The emerald is not what it seems. Sir Henry's journal hints at a deception, a secret hidden within the gem. I must find his writings, for they hold the key to Arabella's curse. Poirot's heart quickened, his little gray cells racing. A secret within the emerald? A hidden compartment, perhaps? Or a clue etched in its facets? He searched the library for Sir Henry's journal, finding it in a hidden drawer beneath the desk, its pages brittle and yellowed. The entries detailed Henry's travels, his acquisition of the emerald, and a startling revelation. The prince warned me, the emerald hides a map, etched in gold, to a hollow core. It points to a treasure buried on my estate, a fortune to secure the Ashfords' future. I have kept it secret lest it bring ruin. The journal included a cryptic sketch, lines and symbols resembling the Moors' landmarks, with a note. Beneath the oak by the river's bend, the treasure lies. Poirot's mind raced. A map hidden within the emerald, leading to a treasure. This explained the shard, the theft, the desperation. Someone had broken the emerald to access the map, perhaps unaware of its full significance. Madame Vera's murder suggested she had stumbled upon this secret, her notebook hinting at the one who knows the truth. The hauntings, orchestrated by Clara, were a distraction, meant to drive the household away, allowing the culprit to search undisturbed. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room, the fire casting shadows on their tense faces. Mes amis, he said, his voice steady. The Ashford emerald is more than a jewel. It is a key to a hidden treasure, a secret guarded for centuries. Someone among us sought to claim it, using fear and murder to conceal their actions. I have found a shard of the emerald, proof it was shattered. Who among you knows of this map? Ashford's face paled, his voice trembling. A map? Monsieur Poirot, I had no idea. Eleanor never mentioned such a thing. Beatrice's eyes widened, her voice soft. Mother said the emerald was special, but a treasure? She was searching for something, but she never told me what. Victor's scowl deepened, his voice sharp. This is nonsense, Poirot. A treasure map? You're chasing fairy tales now. Mrs. Hale's hands clenched her keys, her voice cold. If there's a treasure, it's news to me. The staff know nothing of it. Carver's trembling intensified, his voice barely audible. A treasure. It's why the spirits are angry. They guard it, don't they? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his cane tapping the floor. No, Monsieur Carver. It is not spirits, but greed that guards this secret. The emerald was stolen, shattered, and Madame Vera was silenced because she knew too much. Clara's hauntings were a diversion, but the true motive lies here, in the past. He produced the note Clara had given him, holding it aloft. This note, it instructs Clara to continue the charade. Its writer is our mastermind, and I am close to their identity. Tonight, we shall search the moors, following the map's clues, and the guilty will reveal themselves. The household agreed, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. Poirot led them to the river's bend, a mile from the manor, where an ancient oak stood, its gnarled roots clutching the earth. The fog had lifted, the moon casting a silver light over the moors. Poirot examined the tree, finding a hollow beneath its roots recently disturbed. Inside was a small chest, its lock broken, containing gold coins and a faded document, a deed to a valuable parcel of land hidden by Sir Henry to secure the Ashfords' future. As the household gasped, Poirot's eyes caught a flicker of movement. Victor, stepping back, his face pale. Monsieur Victor, Poirot said, his voice sharp. You move as though caught. Did you know of this chest? Victor's jaw tightened, his voice defiant. I didn't, Poirot. You're barking up the wrong tree. Poirot's smile was serene. Perhaps, but the truth is near. The emerald's map led here, and someone sought its treasure. We shall return to the manor, and Hercule Poirot will name the guilty. The night ended with the household in turmoil, the treasure's discovery a new twist in the mystery. Poirot's mind was clear, the clues aligning, and he was ready to confront the mastermind behind Blackthorn Manor's nightmare. Chapter 14. The Final Confrontation. The moon hung low over the Devon moors, its silver light piercing the thinning fog that still clung to Blackthorn Manor's ancient stone walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, his small frame commanding the space despite the late hour, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man who had unraveled a complex tapestry of deceit. The air was heavy with the scent of burning logs and the faint mustiness of the manor's old furnishings, the fire casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled household. The discovery of the treasure chest beneath the oak, containing gold coins and a deed to valuable land, had sent shockwaves through the manor, confirming the Ashford Emerald's secret, a hidden map etched within its facets. The theft of the emerald, the murder of Madame Vera, the staged hauntings orchestrated by Clara, all were threads in a plot driven by greed and desperation, and Poirot was poised to name the mastermind behind it all. Lord Reginald Ashford sat by the fire, his silver hair disheveled, his face pale with exhaustion and disbelief. Beatrice Ashford perched on a sofa, her auburn hair loose, her blue eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope, her hands clutching a lace handkerchief. Victor Ashford leaned against the mantel, his sharp features taut, his gray eyes flickering with unease as he avoided Poirot's gaze. Mrs. Margaret Hale, the housekeeper, stood near the door, her gray bun severe, her posture rigid but her hands trembling slightly as they gripped her keys. Mr. Carver, the butler, hovered by the sideboard, his trembling hands arranging coffee cups, his face ashen from the weight of recent events. Clara, the maid, was present under Mrs. Hale's supervision, her brown eyes downcast, her confession as the ghostly figure in white still hanging over the room like a storm cloud. Poirot's cane tapped the floor, drawing all eyes to him. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice calm but resonant, cutting through the tense silence. "Blackthorn Manor has been a stage for a most elaborate performance, a masquerade of fear, theft, and murder. The Ashford Emerald, with its hidden map, was the prize, leading to a treasure buried beneath the oak. Clara, manipulated by notes and money, played the ghost to sow fear. Madame Vera, with her keen observations, was silenced to protect the secret. Lady Eleanor's death, once called an accident, was the spark that ignited this plot. Tonight, Hercule Poirot shall reveal the mastermind who wove this web of deception." Beatrice gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. "Monsieur Poirot, you know who did this? Who killed Mother and Madame Vera?" Ashford's voice was hoarse, his hands trembling. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, end this nightmare, name the guilty, and let us have peace." Victor's scowl deepened, his voice sharp. "This better not be another wild guess, Poirot. I'm tired of your games." Mrs. Hale's eyes flashed, her voice cold. "Mind your tongue, Mr. Victor. Monsieur Poirot is our only hope. Let him speak." Carver's trembling intensified, his voice barely audible. "It's the curse, sir. Whoever did this, they've angered the spirits." Poirot's mustache twitched, his smile serene but unyielding. "Non, Monsieur Carver, there are no spirits here, only the greed and ambition of the living. Let us begin with the facts, and the truth shall emerge." He paced the room, his cane tapping rhythmically, his words deliberate. Lady Eleanor's death was no accident. Her journals reveal she uncovered a secret, the emerald's map leading to a treasure hidden by Sir Henry Ashford. She argued, with someone the night she died, as Mademoiselle Beatrice witnessed. That argument ended in her fall from the balcony, staged to look accidental. The hauntings began soon after, to drive the household away, allowing the culprit to search for the treasure undisturbed. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "Mother was murdered?" Who would do such a thing? Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting each reaction. Ashford's shock, Beatrice's grief, Victor's unease, Mrs. Hale's rigidity, Carver's fear, Clara's silence. The emerald's theft was the next act, he continued. The safe was opened without force, suggesting a key or knowledge of the combination. The emerald was shattered to extract the map, leaving a shard in the lock, which I found. Clara's hauntings, with her white dress and hidden passage, were a diversion, orchestrated by notes left in her room. Madame Vera, with her notebook of suspicions, saw too much, and was struck down with the candlestick, the scene dressed with occult symbols to point to the curse. Ashford's face paled further, his voice raw. But who, Monsieur Poirot? Who had? The key, the knowledge, the motive. Poirot produced the note Clara had given him, holding it aloft. This note, with its precise handwriting, instructed Clara to continue the ghostly charade. It matches another clue, the handwriting in Madame Vera's notebook, where she wrote of the one who knows the truth. The culprit is someone with access to the Manor's secrets, someone who knew of the emerald's map, someone who could manipulate Clara and silence Madame Vera. Victor's jaw tightened, his voice defiant. You're pointing at me, aren't you? I didn't write that note, Poirot. I didn't know about any map. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his tone measured. Monsieur Victor, your financial troubles and desire to sell the manor make you a suspect, oui. But let us consider all possibilities. Madame Hale, your control over the staff is absolute and you have access to every room, including the strong room. Mrs. Hale's hands clenched her keys, her voice sharp. How dare you, Monsieur Poirot? I've served this family loyally for 20 years. I'd never betray them. Poirot nodded, turning to Carver. And you, Monsieur Carver, your fear is genuine, but your trembling hands suggest knowledge unspoken. Did you see something the night Madame Vera died? Carver's eyes widened, his voice quavering. I was in the pantry, sir, I swear it. I didn't see nothing. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was relentless. He turned to Clara, who shrank under his scrutiny. Mademoiselle Clara, you said the notes were left in your room. Who could enter your quarters unseen? Clara hesitated, her voice barely audible. Anyone, sir. The staff quarters are near the back stairs, but I never saw who left them. Poirot's cane tapped the floor, his voice rising. Let us consider the emerald's map. Sir Henry's journal found in the library revealed its secret, a treasure hidden beneath the oak. Lady Eleanor discovered this, and her death followed. Someone in this room knew of her findings, and they acted to protect their claim. He paused, his eyes locking on Mrs. Hale, whose composure cracked, her hands trembling violently. Madame Hale, he said, his voice soft but piercing. You were close to Lady Eleanor, oui? You helped her in her final days, perhaps saw her journals, heard her speak of the emerald secret. Mrs. Hale's face paled, her voice a hiss. You accuse me, Monsieur Poirot. I loved Lady Eleanor. I'd never harm her. Poirot's smile was gentle but relentless. Love can turn to desperation, madam. Your loyalty to the Ashfords is unquestioned, but your family, your brother, a gambler in debt, non? I have learned from the village that he owes a fortune, and a treasure would erase such debts. Mrs. Hale's eyes widened, her hands clutching her keys so tightly her knuckles whitened. You know nothing of my family. This is slander. Poirot produced a letter from his pocket, its handwriting matching the note Clara had given him. This letter, found in your office, speaks of your brother's debts and your promise to secure funds. The handwriting is yours, Madame Hale, and it matches the notes to Clara. You orchestrated the hauntings using Clara to drive the household away. You stole the emerald, shattering it to find the map. And when Madame Vera suspected you, you struck her down. The room erupted in gasps, Beatrice crying out, Ashford staggering to his feet, Victor's scowl giving way to shock. Mrs. Hale's composure shattered, her voice a desperate cry. No, you're wrong. I didn't kill her. I needed the money, yes, for my brother, but I didn't kill Eleanor or Vera. Poirot's voice was steady, his eyes unyielding. Madame, you pushed Lady Eleanor from the balcony when she confronted you about the emerald. You used your access to the strong room to steal it. And when Madame Vera's notebook revealed her suspicions, you silenced her with the candlestick, dressing the scene with symbols to point to the curse. Mrs. Hale sank to her knees, her keys clattering to the floor, her voice a sob. I didn't mean to hurt Eleanor. She was going to tell Reginald to ruin me. I panicked. And Vera, she saw me in the West Wing, asked questions. I had no choice. Ashford's voice was raw, his eyes filling with tears. Margaret, how could you? Eleanor trusted you. Beatrice wept, her hands covering her face. Victor's voice was low, stunned. All this for money? Poirot's gaze softened, his tone gentle. Greed and fear, they twist the heart, no? Madame Hale, you shall face justice, but the truth has freed Blackthorn Manor from its shadows. The household stood in stunned silence as Mrs. Hale was led away by Ashford, who promised to summon the authorities. Poirot remained in the drawing room, his cane tapping the floor, his mind at peace. The emerald's secret was revealed, the treasure secured, and the ghosts of Blackthorn Manor laid to rest, not spirits but the shadows of human folly. Chapter 15. The Echoes of Truth. The morning sun broke through the lingering fog, casting a golden glow over Blackthorn Manor's weathered stone facade, softening its stern lines and bathing the moors in a rare warmth. Hercule Poirot stood in the entrance hall, his small frame immaculate in a tailored gray suit, his silver-headed cane resting lightly in his hand. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of the rose garden, a stark contrast to the heavy mustiness that had cloaked the manor during the days of fear and suspicion. The revelation of Mrs. Margaret Hale as the mastermind behind Lady Eleanor's death, the theft of the Ashford emerald, and the murder of Madame Vera had lifted a dark veil from the household. But the wounds of betrayal lingered, and Poirot's work was not yet complete. His little gray cells, ever vigilant, sought to tie the final threads of the mystery, ensuring no shadow of doubt remained. The household gathered in the drawing room, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and sorrow. Lord Reginald Ashford sat by the fire, his silver hair neatly combed, though his eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped under the weight of grief and betrayal. Beatrice Ashford sat beside him, her auburn hair pinned loosely, her blue eyes, clear but haunted, her hands folded in her lap. Victor Ashford stood by the window, his sharp features softened by the morning light, his gray eyes thoughtful rather than defiant. Mr. Carver, the butler, moved with less trembling, though his hands still shook as he served tea, his face pale but composed. Clara, the maid, was absent, having been sent to stay with a relative in the village while the authorities dealt with Mrs. Hale, who was now in custody, awaiting trial. The manor felt emptier, its oppressive atmosphere lightened, yet the echoes of the past lingered in every creak of the floorboards. Poirot sipped his tisane, his movements precise, his green eyes scanning the room. The treasure chest, with its gold coins and deed to valuable land, had been secured in the strong room, its discovery a bittersweet victory. The Ashford emerald, shattered to reveal its hidden map, was lost, but its secret had been uncovered, and the manor's future was no longer shrouded in fear. Poirot's task now was to ensure the household understood the full truth, to heal the fractures caused by deception, and to confirm that no other conspirators lurked in the shadows. Maze, Ami, Poirot began, his voice calm but resonant, drawing all eyes to him. The nightmare that gripped Blackthorn Manor has ended. Madame Hale's confession has revealed the truth. Her greed, fueled by her brother's debts, drove her to murder Lady Eleanor, steal the emerald, and silence Madame Vera. Clara, manipulated by notes and money, played the ghost to sow fear, a distraction to allow Madame Hale to search for the treasure hidden by Sir Henry Ashford. But there are details yet to clarify, no? Let us walk through the events so the echoes of truth may bring peace. Ashford's voice was hoarse, his hands clasped tightly. Monsieur Poirot, you've done more than we could have hoped. Margaret's betrayal, it's unimaginable. But are you certain there's no one else involved? Beatrice's voice trembled, her eyes searching Poirot's face. I can't believe Mrs. Hale did this alone. She was so trusted. Could someone have helped her? Victor's tone was subdued, his scowl replaced by a frown. I still don't get it, Poirot. How did she pull it off? The safe, the murder, all while running the house? Carver's hands shook as he set down a teapot, his voice low. It's hard to believe, sir. Mrs. Hale was strict, but kind to us. I never thought she'd kill. Poirot's mustache twitched, his smile gentle but firm. Questions are natural, mes amis, and Hercule Poirot shall answer them. Let us begin with Lady Eleanor's death, the spark of this tragedy. He paced the room, his cane tapping rhythmically, his words deliberate. Lady Eleanor's journals, found in the library, revealed her discovery of the emerald secret, a map to a treasure hidden beneath the oak. She argued with Madame Hale the night she died, as Mademoiselle Beatrice overheard. Madame Hale, aware of the treasure through Eleanor's confidences, saw a chance to save her brother from ruin. When Eleanor threatened to expose her, Madame Hale pushed her from the balcony, staging it as an accident. The coroner, finding no evidence of foul play, closed the case, but the hauntings began soon after. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, her voice soft. Mother, she was trying to protect us, wasn't she? She wanted to end the curse. Poirot nodded, his tone soothing. Oui, mademoiselle. Your mother sought truth, but it led her to danger. Madame Hale, using her authority as housekeeper, orchestrated the hauntings to drive you from the manor, allowing her to search for the treasure undisturbed. Victor frowned, his voice low. But the emerald? How did she get into the safe? Only Uncle Reginald had the key. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his fingers steepled. A fine question, Monsieur Victor. Madame Hale, with access to every room, had made a wax impression of the key years ago. A precaution for emergencies. She used it to open the safe, shattering the emerald, to extract the map, leaving a shard in the lock, which I found. The theft was meant to distract, to focus suspicion on an outsider or Clara. Ashford's face paled, his voice trembling. She had a key? All this time she could have... My God, Monsieur Poirot, how did we not see it? Poirot's gaze softened, his voice gentle. Betrayal blinds us, mon cher. Madame Hale's loyalty was her mask worn for 20 years. But let us continue to Madame Vera's murder. He produced Madame Vera's notebook, its pages marked with his notes. The medium, with her sharp eyes, observed Madame Hale in the west wing, perhaps near the hidden passage. Her notebook speaks of the one who knows the truth, a reference to Madame Hale's secret. When Madame Vera confronted her, perhaps seeking to bargain, Madame Hale struck her with the candlestick, staging the scene with occult symbols to point to the curse. The candlestick was discarded in the moors, but I found wax traces near the body, confirming its use. Beatrice gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. She killed her to keep quiet? Oh, Monsieur Poirot, it's too horrible. Victor's voice was grim, his eyes narrowing. And Clara? How did Hale get her to play along? Poirot turned to the door where Clara's absence was felt. Mademoiselle Clara, a simple girl, was vulnerable to money and threats. Madame Hale left notes in her room, with small payments, instructing her to wear the white dress, use the hidden passage, and create disturbances. Clara, fearing ruin, complied, believing it was to help sell the manor. The notes, in Madame Hale's handwriting, matched the letter I found in her office, speaking of her brother's debts. Carver's voice quavered, his hands trembling. Mrs. Hale. She was always so proper. I saw her in the West Wing once, late at night, but she said she was checking for drafts. I should have said something. Poirot's smile was kind, his tone reassuring. You could not have known, Monsieur Carver. Fear clouds the mind, and Madame Hale used it masterfully. Ashford's voice was raw, his eyes fixed on Poirot. And the treasure, Monsieur Poirot? The chest we found. Will it save the manor or bring more trouble? Poirot's cane tapped the floor, his voice steady. The treasure, gold coins and a deed to land, is a fortune, oui, but its true value is in restoring Blackthorn Manor's future. With wise management, it can secure your legacy, Lord Ashford. The emerald is lost, but its secret has served its purpose. Beatrice's voice was soft, hopeful. Can we stay here, Father? Without fear, without ghosts? Ashford reached for her hand, his voice trembling. We'll try, Beatrice. With Monsieur Poirot's help, we'll rebuild. Victor's tone was subdued, his eyes thoughtful. I was wrong about selling, Uncle. If this treasure can keep the manor, I'll help. No more running. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his heart warmed by their resolve. He spent the morning tying loose ends, examining the West Wing's hidden passage one final time. The footprints, now faded, confirmed Clara's role, and the silk scraps matched the dress she had worn. He visited the strong room, ensuring the treasure was secure, and spoke with the village constable who had taken Mrs. Hale into custody. Her confession, racked with sobs, matched Poirot's deductions, closing the case. As afternoon approached, Poirot prepared to depart, his work complete. The manor, though scarred, was free of its shadows, its future brightened by truth. He stood in the entrance hall, his suitcase packed, his cane in hand, as the household gathered to bid him farewell. Ashford's voice was thick with emotion, his hand extended. Monsieur Poirot, we owe you everything. You've given us back our home, our peace. Beatrice's eyes shone, her voice soft. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You've honored Mother's memory. Victor nodded, his scowl gone. You're a sharp one, Poirot. I misjudged you. Carver bowed slightly, his trembling eased. Safe travels, sir. You've done a miracle here. Poirot's smile was serene, his mustache perfectly aligned. Mes amis, the miracle is truth, and it is always within reach of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Adieu, and may Blackthorn Manor know only light henceforth. He stepped into the waiting car, the moors stretching before him, the manor's towers fading into the mist. The echoes of truth lingered, a melody of justice, and Poirot's heart was at peace, ready for the next mystery to call him forth.